A galaxy divided. War ravages each one of the stars. There are heroes on both sides, but evil is everywhere. It was a small spark that ignited the Clone Wars, but nothing stopped the raging inferno from consuming the galaxy for 3 very long years. It was a time of pure warfare, political corruption, galactic anxiety, and the full degradation of peace, unity, and democracy. Behind it all was Darth Sidious controlling both sides of the war as Supreme Chancellor, as well as Dark Lord of the Sith. The Clone Wars was his masterpiece, the culmination of the Sith grand plan to bring down the Jedi Order and destroy the Republic as everyone knew it. But on both a macro and a micro scale, a lot happened during this war, so much that it is almost unbelievable, and the fact that it only lasted 3 years is insane. Within that time, the Jedi Order completely lost their way, became vulnerable to the dark side. The galaxy morphed into a mindset of desperation and panic, making them willing to sacrifice their freedom for peace. And Anakin Skywalker made his transformation from a hot-headed Padawan into one of the most powerful Jedi Knights to ever live. And then, of course, came his fall from glory. But because this war was the most eventful in any of all of galactic history, the timeline is not exactly clear. The galaxy underwent so many events that it's hard to tell who knows what all happened to the galaxy during this conflict. Well, if you're here, lore junkies, then you've decided to join us on our mission to chart each battle and major event of the Clone Wars. But we want to do this meticulously, so we will be examining this each year at a time, starting with the year 22 BBY, the very first year of the Clone War. And of course, we will be drawing from Legends continuity. However, before we actually do this, there are some very important continuity-related matters that we need to discuss. Both the 2003 micro-series and seasons 1 through 6 of the 2008 CGI cartoon are considered a part of Legends continuity. This, coupled with the wide array of novels, comics, and fact file entries, means that not only is the Clone Wars tightly packed with stories, but the actual timeline is also skewed. The most important thing this affects is the month-by-month placement of events. During the research of this video, we found that there was little to no coherency between the creatives of the books, games, and the comics, causing a lot of the official material to contradict itself on the micro timeline. Some events that were originally taking place much later in the war were moved to having occurred within the very first few weeks due to the 2008 series. So unfortunately, even though some stories tell us that they happened a certain amount of months after the Battle of Geonosis, we can't trust that information. There are also sources that claim that the Clone Wars started in the middle of 22 BBY, causing the first year to bleed over into 21 BBY. For the sake of simplicity though, we have done our best to ensure that all events that we speak of today will expressively occur in 22 BBY. Another continuity note that we need to mention is the knighting of Anakin Skywalker and how long he was a Padawan after Geonosis. Many Legends novels and games were written very soon after Episode 2 with no knowledge of any future Star Wars projects. So in some sources, Anakin is often still a Jedi Padawan well into 21 BBY, while in others he is stated to have been knighted within the first few months of the war. But because Ahsoka appears early on in the first year, Anakin couldn't possibly have been knighted any later than that. And so for this video, we will be considering the authentic continuity that Anakin was knighted at some point during this first year, and we will be triangulating exactly when this happened. Finally, it's worth mentioning that many conflicts and battles overlap and happen concurrently with one another. So keep in mind that if it feels like this year is extraordinarily busy, it's become the timeline of events are not always linear. Our goal today is to not simply retell the entire events of the show though, but to coherently plot the major events through a historical lens. So today we will not be diving into smaller missions or private character moments. So with all of this out of the way, we've collected each data disk and decrypted all of the Republic's classified files to bring you the complete first year of the Clone Wars, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Before the storm. Understanding anything about the Clone Wars requires knowing a summarized history of exactly what led into it. Despite the manipulations of Palpatine, the onset of the war was not a match lighting a stick of dynamite. Rather, it was decades of seismic pressure building towards a volcanic eruption. This made it much more devastating when it finally happened, as neither side was willing to negotiate or back down. And that seismic pressure begins with the trouble in the Outer Rim and the Separatist movement. The rift between the Rim and the core was old news, which had caused a great deal of political issues for centuries at this point. With no formalized military, the Republic Judicial Department only had so much reach in the Mid and the Outer Rim worlds. This rendered their presence, authority, and the general rule of law out there purely theoretical. Many smaller systems were unable to protect themselves from pirates and warlords. forcing them to make deals with predatory corporations like the Czerka and the Trade Federation. They would essentially hand their voting power in the Senate over to these corporations in exchange for food, supplies, and protection, making trade companies much more powerful in the process. The Rimworlds began to despise the core because of their enjoyment of luxuries and their safety. Meanwhile, the Outer Rim had to live in subjugation every day to the megacorporations, or suffer under pirates and slavers. And because the Jedi had fully submitted themselves to the will of the Senate rather than the will of the Force, they would do nothing to fix these injustices themselves. Talks of secession had occurred before, but none of the Rimworld systems were strong enough to do so without threatening a war. The Senate was polarized on what to do about the political isolation of the Outer Rim territories, a situation compounded by the schemes of greedy corporations out to protect their own interests through bribe and blackmail. However, everything tipped on its head with the Naboo crisis. In 124 BBY, the Senate passed a legislation declaring portions of the Outer Rim as tax-free trade zones. This was originally meant to jumpstart trade on the Rim and to mend the rift between the Rim and the core. With this also came the ability for the Senate representation to be given to the galaxy's largest megacorporations, though. None benefited from this more than the Trade Federation, who quickly bought up votes of hundreds of disenfranchised systems in exchange for protection. This caused a massive problem for many who opposed the Federation's rapidly growing power in the Senate. But in 32 BBY, Chancellor Valorum decided to repel the free trade zones in an effort to limit the frankly unfair amount of voting power that the Trade Federation now commanded. The Neimoidian cartel was enraged by this, and Darth Sidious quickly swooped in, promising them all the money and power they could ever want if they simply followed his commands. At his behest, they blockaded Naboo in protest of the free trade zone repeal. In addition, they attempted to force Queen Amidala to sign a treaty that would exclusively give rights to Naboo's extremely rich and valuable plasma export exclusively to the Trade Federation. Without consulting the Senate first, Valorum would send Jedi ambassadors Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn to resolve the issue, but negotiations failed, and Sidious commanded the Federation to launch a full invasion of the planet. The Jedi helped the Queen escape, and after a run-in with the Sith Darth Maul, they brought her to the Senate. After failing to convince the Republic to help her planet, Amidala was manipulated by Palpatine into calling for a vote of no confidence against Chancellor Valorum. Valorum, who was already very unpopular at this point. He was impeached, and Palpatine was nominated for Supreme Chancellor out of pity for what was happening to his homeworld of Naboo. Amidala and the Jedi returned to Naboo and managed to liberate the planet from the control of the Federation. But because they had to act alone without the help of the Republic or even the go-ahead of the Jedi Council, it came at the cost of many lives, including Qui-Gon's. The result of this calamity made the Republic look weak and ineffectual. The well-respected and powerful Master Dooku would even resign from his post as a Jedi, reclaiming his family's title as Count of Sereno. And afterwards, he would vanish from the galactic stage. Behind the scenes, Dooku had been enticed into the Order of the Sith Lords by Sidious. Sidious, who now needed a new apprentice after the supposed death of Darth Maul. And an apprentice like Dooku would serve his purposes much better. Maul was a ballistic missile, a weapon to be pointed and then fired. But Dooku, now Darth Tyrannus, was charismatic, and he held much sway in the Outer Rim territory. Dooku would be essential to the Sith's plans of instigating a galactic-wide war. 8 full years would pass until 24 BBY when Dooku re-emerged as a political visionary and an outspoken critic of the Republic. Dooku would make his big mark on the industrial powerhouse of Raxus Prime, where he gave a famous address decreeing the corruption that now consumed and bled throughout the Republic. His impassioned speech likened the Republic's rot to a Raxan garbage worm, as Dooku publicly pointed out the failings of the Jedi as they acted as the Senate's lapdogs rather than true keepers of peace. Moved by the fiery words and wisdom of a former Jedi, Raxus Prime broadcast this speech all over the Rim until it was reaching the ores of the core worlds. Dooku swayed countless worlds and commercial concerns to join the New Republic. The Confederacy of Independent Systems, or the CIS, was born. This movement terrified the core and the Inner Rim systems alike, who saw the Separatists as a threat to their very way of life. Of course, not by coincidence. Dooku's re-emergence corresponded with the end of Palpatine's 8-year term in office. In order for him to lead the Republic through the Separatist crisis, Palpatine won a vote of the indefinite extension of his term. This came despite the clear unconstitutionality and misgivings of many Jedi. The Senate hoped that Palpatine would bring a swift end to what appeared to be a foolhardily demand of a political idealist. but how wrong they were. In fact, even without knowledge that Palpatine and Dooku were working together, everyone vastly underestimated how truly dangerous Dooku and the Confederacy was. On the surface, he was simply swaying systems to his side, but beneath it all, he was gathering and training many dark acolytes in the Force. Among these servants was the horrendous four-armed cyborg General Grievous. Grievous, whose sole purpose was to slaughter Jedi and to lead the Separatist droid army. For another year, the CIS would significantly grow in power, as Dooku managed to solicit the aid of the galaxy's 6 major industrial corporations. While none of them had yet officially joined the Confederacy, their financial assistance had progressed the Separatists into becoming a legitimate galactic threat. The Bactoid armor workshop factories of Geonosis produced millions of battle droids. The Commerce Guild and the intergalactic banking clan of Muunilinst were major financial hubs who also supplied the IG series droid to the army. The Commerce Guild controlled raw materials under the leadership of Gossam Magistrate Shu Mai, and Wat Tambor and his Techno Union controlled dozens of industrial worlds with which to supply ships and weapons. The only corporation to not fully commit to Dooku's plan was the Trade Federation. Newt Gunray demanded that the Count deliver Amidala's head to him out of revenge of his humiliation on Naboo. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, many senators thought the Chancellor could simply let them go and allow the Confederacy to exist peacefully alongside the Republic. Others pushed for the passage of a Military Creation Act that would finally create a grand army to bolster the meager judicial department of the Republic. But Palpatine continued to condemn the Separatists without committing to the creation of a formalized military. Soon enough, sparse events began to take place that indicated the 1,000-year time of peace that the Republic had enjoyed was now over. The Battle of Antar IV saw a group of terrorists take over the moon by killing the Jedi-allied Antarian Rangers, before making a declaration of secession from the Republic. Antarian Rangers from across the galaxy rushed to the moon for revenge against the terrorists. Jedi Masters Coleman Trebor and Say Tin aided them with battalions of Jedi Knights. However, their result was disastrous and resulted in massive casualties of both Jedi and civilians. Eventually, they succeeded in overthrowing the terrorists, but at the cost of the goodwill of the people of Antar IV, who blamed the Jedi for their sloppy tactics that cost them the destruction of their homes and many of their lives. Separatist planets from across the galaxy took the Battle of Antar IV as a sign that the Republic was foolish and obsolete. From here, many more worlds seceded, such as Ando and Sy-Mirth. All this was simply the tremors before the eruption that was the Battle of Geonosis. Events began slowly, and then rapidly accelerated towards Armageddon. It all began with the arrival of Padme Amidala to the world of Coruscant, where she would be placing her vote against the Military Creation Act. But when her starship exploded, it became apparent that she was being targeted for assassination. This had been ordered by Darth Sidious and Count Dooku. Both had their reasons for needing Amidala dead. Palpatine needed her out of the picture so that her powerful voice in the Senate would not keep the Military Creation Act from moving forward. Dooku needed Gunray to sign the Trade Federation on the CIS, and so they enlisted the work of a bounty hunter by the name of Jango Fett, who subcontracted the assassin and his colleague Zam Wesell. This convoluted chain of command was so that it would be more difficult to trace the assassination back to the Sith. The Jedi Council decided that it would be in their best interest of the Senate to have some of their own protect her, and so they assigned the task to 2 Jedi she was familiar with, Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Padawan, Anakin Skywalker. A second attempt was made on her life involving poisonous Kohuns. Also, this failed, but resulted in the apprehension of Zam Wesell. The assassin was then killed by Jango Fett with a poisoned dart, before she could reveal any information to the Jedi. Seeing that the senator was in too much danger on Coruscant, the council elected to have her return to her homeworld of Naboo under the guardianship of Anakin, while Kenobi traced the dart to a hidden cloning facility on the planet of Kamino. It was there where he was welcomed by the Kaminoans, who believed that he was there to oversee their army of Jango Fett clones which they claimed had been grown for the Jedi Master Dyas. In reality, Dyas had indeed placed the order for the clone army in secret nearly 10 years ago, but he had done so under the guidance of the Sith, and was promptly killed thereafter by Darth Tyrannus. Here Obi-Wan came face to face with Jango, and attempted to bring him back to Coruscant for questioning, but after a messy combat, the bounty hunter escaped the Jedi's grasp. Kenobi traced him to the droid factories of Geonosis. While there, he eavesdropped on a major meeting between Dooku and the Commerce factions, who all joined the CIS and formed the Separatist Council. They were now officially ready to openly attack the Republic. Kenobi, however, managed to send out a message of the shocking news to Anakin, who he had hoped would relay it to Coruscant. Upon intercepting the transmission, Anakin and Padme rushed to the aid of Kenobi only to end up captured themselves.
Good job.
Back on Coruscant, Grandmaster Yoda, Mace Windu, and Chancellor Palpatine all viewed Obi-Wan's message, and grimly decided that war was the only way to stop the Separatists. Jar Jar Binks, who was meant to represent Naboo's interests in Padme's absence, put forth a motion which gave emergency powers to Palpatine, who then officially announced the creation of the Grand Army of the Republic. Yoda would go to Kamino to investigate the clone army himself, while Windu took a private legion of Jedi to infiltrate Geonosis. Meanwhile, Padme, Anakin, and Obi-Wan had all been slated for execution by Beast in the Geonosian arena. But plans changed when the three turned the gladiatorial execution on its head. They were then rescued by a vast number of Jedi Masters, Knights, and Padawans, who all made themselves known throughout the crowd. The Council had hoped that the sheer number of Jedi present would be enough to intimidate the Separatists into surrendering without a fight. Because of this, all the Masters were encouraged to bring along their Padawans, whether they were battle-trained or not. But things took a desperate turn when Dooku unveiled the Separatist droid army, who marched into the arena en masse. A massive battle erupted between the Jedi and the droid soldiers. In the fray, Jango Fett would lose his life, and unbeknownst to most, General Grievous scuttled through the Geonosian catacombs, taking the lives of several hapless Jedi there. However, because of the amount of Padawans present, and the fact that most members of the Jedi Order were woefully unprepared for a large-scale battle, the skirmish turned into a slaughter. Of the nearly 200 Jedi that arrived, only an estimated 20 of them survived. Surrounded by the droid army, the survivors awaited execution by firing squad. That was until Yoda arrived with 200,000 clone troopers to once again swing the pendulum of battle to the Jedi. The battle moved out to the desert of Geonosis, where both sides clashed on a full-scale war with heavy artillery. Several Jedi Masters were hastily given command of clone squadrons and sent directly into the fray. The Separatist Council managed to escape, even though many of their ships were shot down in the process. Meanwhile, elite clone commandos were dropped behind enemy lines to take out key Separatist targets, resulting in the assassination of Sun Fac, the Geonosian's second-in-command. Dooku then departed to a secret hangar, but was followed by Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The two heroes failed to arrest the Count, and instead ended their brief duel with serious injuries. Once again, Yoda came to the rescue, but failed in his mission, as Dooku was able to distract the Grand Master long enough to escape himself. The Battle of Geonosis marked the very first conflict of this new war, and the Republic's new soldiers would give this war its namesake, the Clone Wars. However, even though it ended in a Republic victory, it was not without heavy casualties, and proof that the Jedi and the Republic were fallible. Due to battlefield inexperience, many of the clone units were grossly mishandled by their Jedi leaders, leading to massive death tolls in the Republic ranks. But as the peacekeepers and guardians of the Republic, the Jedi had to take up the mantle of generals for the first time since the 7th Battle of Ruusan nearly a millennium prior. But this was just the start to the first year of one of the galaxy's bloodiest conflicts. The Clone Wars had officially begun. The early war plunged into chaos. In the early weeks of 22 BBY, events took off at a breakneck pace. The Sith had spent decades preparing for the war, and they already had a plan for when it would happen, so it is no surprise when military movements and flashpoints began erupting one after the other, all after the opening that the Battle of Geonosis left. The Republic could have pressed their advantage and overrun Confederate space before the war progressed any further. Unfortunately, this war was dropped straight into their laps, and then the fact of the matter was that they were not prepared for the war at all. They did not have a strategy ready to go or accomplish a full assault in the Outer Rim that would have worked at all. But even if they did, they were sorely lacking the numbers to do so. Until all of the clone battalions could be activated and the new warships launched, the Republic didn't have enough assets to fight on any galactic scale. In contrast, the Separatists were not slow to respond at all. Dooku had foreknowledge of the war, and he had already set in motion to secure the strong Confederate holdings in the Mid and the Outer Rim territories. The Separatists moved quickly to sink their hooks into the Yagul, Sluis Van, and the Southern Rimma, as well as various other strategic points in the galaxy. Dooku sought to secure worlds where it lay at specific hyperlane crossroads. This would allow ease of troop deployment in all potential battlefields as well as occupation of whatever opportunistic pockets of space opened up. As he quickly found out, many systems only needed the slightest push to break from the Republic entirely, and because of this, Dooku was able to secure many of the systems in industrial worlds in the Slice. The Slice was a very important cradle of power within the eastern portion of the Mid and the Inner Rim. Dooku also managed to secure holdings in a broad stretch of the Galactic North, a nice corridor in the Galactic South, and even brought the sector of what was once Sith space under Separatist control. To begin the war, the Separatists had the core surrounded, and for the first few weeks, the Republic had to rely on raid tactics, sabotage, and even incitement to even the odds while they formed a plan of attack. But the Separatists were also looking for a swift end to the war. Hoping to corner the Republic and force them into a surrender, the CIS managed to find and locate the world of Kamino. They planned to attack the source of the clone army which had foiled them on Geonosis. But while undercover, the Jedi Master Quinlan Vos discovered these plans and relayed them to the Jedi intelligence. This allowed the Republic to establish a quick defense of the world. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, Oppo Rancisis, Shaak Ti, and Aayla Secura were among the major Jedi generals that participated in this battle. But it seemed that Dooku wasn't truly aiming to destroy the cloning centers, only to scare the Republic by launching a daring attack. After all, it was within the Sith's best interest to keep the war going, and so he actually appointed Magistrate Pacel Arginate of the Corporate Alliance as the officer in charge of this battle, despite the fact that Arginate had zero military experience. The traitorous Mon Calamari commander Mirai was also appointed to lead the assault on Kamino. The Battle of Kamino began in the air, as Kenobi, Skywalker, and Sakura, as well as Su Choi, led a starfighter skirmish with a squadron of droid fighters. Mirai's forces managed to break through much of the Republic's air defense, killing the Jedi pilot and shooting down Obi-Wan's ship. Thankfully though, Anakin managed to rescue him after previously receiving a vision of an accident through the Force. Meanwhile, the Separatists landed on Tipoca City and began tearing through the walls and slaughtering young clones, forcing Shaak Ti and the Prime Minister Lama Su to activate the ARC Trooper units. This was an absolute last resort protocol, as the Kaminoans believed that the first few batches of the ARCs were too independent and therefore too unpredictable for open battle. But this protocol just so happened to save the battle, as the ARC Troopers were able to stop the enemy's advance through the city and prevent any further destruction. ARC Alpha 17 realized that the Separatist forces could overrun their labs, and based on his orders from Jango Fett, he could not allow the clones to fall into enemy hands. And so the ARC entered into a self-destruct mode in a panel on the wall, which began a countdown to an explosion destroying the entire complex. However, Shaak Ti made a moral standpoint on the lives of the incubating clones, and Alpha 17 quickly rethought his plan in order to satisfy both the Jedi ideals and his orders. Under his direction, Shaak Ti, Anakin, and Obi-Wan used the Force to tear down the underwater bridge tube leading to the labs. In the process, this destroyed the bulk of the Separatist droid platoons, and saved the lab from Separatist clutches. Together, the three Jedi successfully held back the water by forming a makeshift plug from the debris of the bridge that they had just obliterated. Above the city in orbit, the Separatist commander Mirai was forced to launch a desperate strike at the supposed location of the city's shield generator, feeling a sense of panic after the initial attack failed. However, the treachery of the Separatist high command became apparent when he realized that his intel was false. There were no shield generators, and his efforts had been in vain. He attempted a mad escape which involved setting up his own ship to self-destruct so that he could destroy the Republic's hyperspace rings. That way, they could not follow him. Unfortunately, he did not make it off of his ship in time, resulting in his death. And with that, Pacel called for a retreat, and the defense of Kamino was an official Republic victory. The attack by the Separatists was designed to fail, and it was organized by Sidious to disgrace several leaders who were trying to replace Dooku. And of course, he wanted the Jedi to start dying in the war. After this bold strike against such an important planet, the Republic was ready to get back to their feet. And this would come with their own thrust for a vital Separatist organ, attacking Muunilinst. This was the home of the intergalactic banking clan, who was a heavy monetary, warship, and battle droid contributor to the CIS. Chancellor Palpatine believed that if they captured the IGBC headquarters, that this would deal the Separatists a major blow early in the war. Obi-Wan and Anakin were elected to lead the assault personally, but the Chancellor appointed Skywalker to lead the starfighter forces, disregarding the misgivings of Obi-Wan and Yoda. Despite the fact that the Republic could only handle a limited number of troop deployment, they mustered an absolutely massive fighting force for the invasion of the moon, heading for Muunilinst. Because it was such an important stronghold world, they expected heavy resistance from the Separatists. Hundreds of LAAT gunships rained down on the world, and the Republic met their first trouble with land-to-air missile barrages. Despite losing a lot of their gunships, the Republic forces managed to land successfully, and with them, the self-propelled heavy artillery, also called the SPHA walkers. These guns were the Republic's plan for victory, and while Anakin engaged the space forces above the planet, Obi-Wan entered a massive infantry battle from the front lines in front of Harnadean City. The Republic broke through the forward lines and began to make considerable progress during the initial stage of the siege. The artillery concentrated fire on the ground just before the clones' front lines. Any units coming from the front lines on the Separatist side were almost instantaneously decimated by artillery barrage, forcing the droids to pull back. Buildings fell quickly to the amount of Republic firepower, and the CIS was quickly losing another battle. Within the city itself, a shuttle carrying a group of ARC troopers crash-landed in the streets. Although Kamino was their first live combat scenario, Muunilinst would prove to be their first real mission, and it was one to be remembered. Led by Captain Fordo, the ARCs cut their way through the streets of the city, taking out droid snipers and the AAT tank before scaling Separatist command towers and eliminating their key target, a massive cannon that had been bombarding Republic forces and keeping them from entering the city. Panicked by the Republic progress of the battle, Chairman San Hill ordered the bounty hunter Dirge to do something to stop the Republic's advance. Dirge had been supplied by Dooku, and he was a powerful cybernetically enhanced bounty hunter with a long history of killing Jedi. And by long, we mean Old Republic long. Dirge took with him a team of droid lancers on speeders and charged for the SPHA walkers, destroying most of them in a single run. Mounting up on his own speeder, General Kenobi counterattacked with clone lancers in a jousting match that left both sides completely ruined. As the last ones left for their respective squads, Kenobi and Dirge engaged in a 1v1. Although the bounty hunter proved to be a dangerous enemy, Obi-Wan dispatched him by cutting him to pieces. Obi-Wan then joined the ARC Trooper squadron that he had secured with the IGBC headquarters, but upon Obi-Wan's arrival, he was followed again by Dirge, who had the ability to rapidly heal due to his body largely being comprised of muscle fibers. Dirge then consumed the Jedi Master and the ARC Troopers as they held him at bay, until Obi-Wan blew Dirge apart from the inside out with a Force repulse. With the battle now officially won, the Muunilinst campaign was just about over. All that was left was the space battle to be finished. With Skywalker's leadership, that was pretty much in the bag, at least until he was led away from the battle by Dooku's new assassin, Asajj Ventress. Ventress would lead the young Jedi on a chase to a nearby moon called Yavin 4. There, the two engaged in a violent duel that ended with Anakin having a brush with the dark side in order to defeat the new Dark Jedi. In reality, the duel had been set up by Dooku and Sidious in order to give Anakin a good enough challenge to bring the dark side out of him. However, Ventress did survive her encounter with the Jedi Knight, and would go on to serve Dooku again throughout the war. Upon Anakin's return, Obi-Wan scolded him for leaving his squad, but luckily the day was still won. At that very moment though, he received a transmission from the Jedi Master Barrick, who was calling for immediate aid and evac from the world of Hypori. While the Muunilinst campaign had been going on, intelligence gathered by Master Dakman Barrick and his Padawan Shah Gi indicated the presence of a large droid factory on Hypori. A task force was assembled consisting of Barrick and his Padawan, along with Ki-Adi-Mundi, Aayla Secura, Shak Ti, Kakruk, and Tar Sayre. The Jedi were dispatched to the planet to destroy the factory, reinforced by an army of clones. As the Republic emerged from hyperspace, they were met with orbital mines which caused the majority of the transports to crash behind Separatist lines. The task force was quickly surrounded by the massive droid army that was stationed on the world, and all of the troopers present were quickly slaughtered. The 7 remaining Jedi were forced to retreat to an area of the planet where they used their own crashed ships as cover. Barrick sent out a distress signal, and his message to Obi-Wan included the fact that they were being hunted, but he was cut off when he was slain by the Supreme Commander of the droid army, General Grievous. The 6 remaining Jedi were left surrounded by hordes of B-2 super battle droids produced by the factory, but all of a sudden, the droids ceased fire, leaving the battlefield eerily quiet. Echoing from the droid front lines, the voice of Grievous rang out, menacingly telling the Jedi that he would soon grant them all a warrior's death. This would be the first time that the Jedi tasted the power of Grievous in the open battlefield. The droid general attacked the Jedi out of the shadows and overwhelmed them with his many arms, devastating strength, and impossible speed. taking down each of the Jedi one by one until only Ki-Adi-Mundi was left standing. But at the perfect moment, the ARC Trooper reinforcements sent by Muunilinst arrived to help. In a single LAAT gunship, the squad dropped down and fired upon Grievous. Their own weapons, though, weren't enough to stop him, but they were able to buy enough time for the remaining living Jedi to be extracted successfully. Afterwards, they used drop mines to blow a hole into the super battle droid army and to cover the Republic escape. The Battle of Hypori left a scar on the Jedi as the menace known as Grievous was now finally in the light. The High Council was greatly disturbed by this, but it would be a while before they could do anything about the droid general. The war continued to wage around them, and more conflicts happened by the hour. Concurrently with the Muunilinst and the Hypori stages, a battle on Dantooine was also active, this one led by Mace Windu. When the Republic besieged Muunilinst, the Confederacy used Dantooine as a staging point to hopefully break the siege. However, Windu learned of this and went to impede their progress. Despite clone forces being outnumbered 4-1 by Separatist super battle droids, Windu's presence on the battlefield evened the odds, and even began turning the battle in the Republic's favor. This was until the Separatists revealed a super weapon of their own, the seismic tank. This hulking machine used its seismic power, a giant pillar once used for mining, to slam down on the ground with considerable force. This would either crush clone forces outright with the driver itself, or send them flying with the terrain-disrupting shockwave. During the confusion of the seismic attack, though, Windu lost his driver, and was forced to fight a small army of B-2s unarmed. Using an impressive display of force, speed, and power, Windu took out most of the droids himself with his hands, before reclaiming his lightsaber and infiltrating the seismic tank. Within just a few minutes, Windu destroyed the superweapon, leading to yet another Republic victory. Across the stars, yet another battle was raging on the aquatic world of Dak. The Mon Calamari and the Quarren both shared this world, and yet had historical animosity. This rivalry was revived when Dooku promised to back the Quarren in their bid to control the world if they plunged to secede with him. Now backed by a droid army, the Quarren moved against the Mon Calamari, intending to start a civil war. But the Jedi were unwilling to lose a powerful ally in the Mon Calamari people, and so they dispatched a contingent of the Grand Army led by their own famous amphibious Jedi Master, Kit Fisto. At the beginning of the battle, the Quarren Isolation League moved against the Calamari cities with the help of the CIS battle droids. The Mon Calamari were quickly reinforced by Fisto's fleet, however, as well as Acclamator-class assault ships, which landed in the broad ocean of Dak. From his command ship, the Jedi Master leapt into battle with an army of clone scuba troopers. The Quarren would attempt to turn the tide with a massive artillery cannon. It managed to fire 2 beam shots, destroying 1 Acclamator-class assault ship. Utilizing his force bubble technique, however, Fisto was able to destroy the cannon's legs, and with the aid of the Mon Calamari Knights, the gun was pushed over the edge of a chasm and was ultimately destroyed. The fighting on Dak would last for several days, until Kit discovered the Quarrens were receiving their orders telepathically. After destroying several Quarren outposts and scattering the telepath commanders, Fisto and the Mon Calamari, as well as the Republic, were again victorious. While these were several early Republic victories, not all of these wins came without severe cost. One such bloody fight came in the first few weeks would be the Battle of Giju. Separatist forces had invaded the planet of a regiment of clone troopers led by Plo Koon's niece. Shah Koon had been sent to take the world back. Because the Republic couldn't spare too many of their own troopers though, they worked very closely alongside Giju's locally raised militia. However, during the battle, Shah Koon's own Padawan and her entire platoon were lost. Although the Republic won that day, an embittered Shah Koon would forever regard the battle as being unnecessary as she returned to the Jedi Temple. Shah would even refuse to take up the mantle as the Jedi General ever again for the remainder of the war. Some may call this cowardly, but others would agree that it was the best move, since Shah would be able to avoid the horrors of what would happen on Omahdun. Omahdun was not a large-scale battle, but it's nonetheless a prominent event because of what almost happened. Omahdun was one of Naboo's moons, which belonged to the Gungans. When Naboo suddenly lost contact with the tribe inhabiting the moon, the Republic would send a squad consisting of 4 Jedi and a few clones led by the ARC Trooper Alpha 17 to investigate. The 4 Jedi were Obi-Wan, Anakin, and the tough Jedi Master Glaive, as well as his Padawan, Zul Kiss. Upon landing on the moon, the Jedi immediately found out that every living being had been killed by some kind of chemical weapon. It turns out that Jenna Zon Arbor, a mad scientist that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had failed to capture numerous times, had thrown her lot in with the Separatist movement. She was testing bioweapons on the Gungans, and the CIS planned to release the weapon on Naboo and then the Greater Republic. The Jedi realized that they themselves were in immediate danger, as the virus had infected them as well. But the virus was the least of their worries. Seeing this project through were two enemies that Obi-Wan and Anakin had thought were taken care of on Muunilinst, Asajj Ventress and Dirge. In the ensuing fight, all of the clones would be murdered besides Alpha 17, who survived. However, Dirge let it slip that there were minors still alive on the planet, and so Obi-Wan sent Anakin and Alpha to go rescue them. He and Zool then engaged Ventress in a duel, which quickly got hairy, as Ventress used dark side magic to reanimate the corpses of the Gungan warriors. Anakin and Alpha 17 managed to liberate the miners, destroy the bioweapon gas canisters, and defeat Dirge, forcing him to flee. Anakin and Alpha reconvened with the other Jedi and surrounded the Dark Jedi Ventress, but she too fled once Dirge picked her up on a jetpack. Although the squad saved Naboo that day, and the Republic from a terrible chemical weapon, it came at the cost of Master Glaive's life, as well as his apprentice's left arm. Anakin inquired of Obi-Wan where Zool would go now, and Kenobi replied with a heartbreaking truth, that she would join the other Padawans who had lost their masters. Already there was an official group of orphan Padawans mere weeks after the war's beginning. But the horrors of the Clone War were now only just starting. Many Jedi were unprepared for the wear on their minds and in the Force that they would be soon experiencing. One of such Jedi was Master Kakruk. Kakruk had in fact not been killed on Hypori by General Grievous as many had assumed. After being cut down by the General, Kakruk entered a healing meditation, one that slowed his vitals to the point of appearing dead. Once he had recovered from the worst of his wounds though, he would return to duty. However, Kakruk's next mission would be the last as a Jedi General. That was because the Battle of Tear would open his eyes to what the Jedi Order was truly becoming. Taking command of the 416th Star Corps, Kakruk led a mission to Tear where they were tracking down a crashed Trade Federation ship that was serving as a Separatist bunker. The only way to get to the bunker though was through a large canyon, which served as a death trap. Kakruk would witness as many of his men were shredded to pieces by spider droids. Barely making it out of the canyon, they led a final assault and push. However, Kakruk knew the Separatists had the advantage of numbers, and so he ordered his clones to fall back. Instead though, his men assured him that they could achieve victory if they only pressed on. The Jedi Master was unprepared to send so many men to their deaths, but the clone troopers reiterated that they knew this, and that this is what they had been born for, to fight and die in battle for the Republic. Reluctantly, Kakruk pressed the attack and would win the day, but it came at the further cost of most of his battalion. Shell-shocked by the incident, Kakruk came to believe that the war was destroying the very foundations of the Jedi Code. He then laid down his title as a Jedi General and left the world of Tear without informing the Jedi Council of his survival, choosing instead to depart in peace and silence. Kakruk was not the only Jedi to feel this sentiment. At some point very early on in the war, there was a hidden 5th Jedi schism, though this one was much smaller and less violent than the others before that have occurred in the Jedi's history. Hundreds of Jedi refused the High Council's orders initially to follow Palpatine's appointment of them as Jedi Generals and receive the title. Believing that it was not a Jedi's place to lead armies, these Jedi believed that the Separatist crisis should be resolved with diplomacy. Mace Windu's close colleague Sora Bulk was originally the informal leader of this faction, until it was revealed that he was a traitor, a dark Jedi that had been working for Dooku and that had been turned early. Upon realizing the deception, many Jedi of this faction returned to the service of the Jedi and became generals, while many others exercised the right of denial and continued to refuse to join the fight. Yoda, Mace Windu, and many others had received the reports of all of this while they were at the funeral of Liana. This had come following the Battle of Liana, where Master Sei Vukto died to protect Saynar Fleet System starfighter facility from a Confederate attack. According to reports, Vukto drew upon the power of the Alter Environment ability, with such intensity that he summoned 2 pillars of water and fire to cleanse the world. The toll of this immense display of Force abilities would cost the Jedi Master his life. But while the Jedi were relying on the Force to guide them through this horrific war, the Separatists were looking at a different solution. one that involved bigger and more dangerous technology. Since the very outbreak of the Clone Wars, one event was running parallel to all of the battles we mentioned previously: the hunt for the Decimator. In the very beginning of the war, the Republic, with the help of the Wookiees, deployed prototypes for a new series of war machines known as Decimators. The Decimators were a frontline hover tank that was equipped with powerful shields, thick armor, and a long-range turbolaser that could target air and ground vehicles alike. The Decimator could engage and defeat crafts as large as an AT-TE with a single bolt. However, its slow firing rate meant that it was suited for battle against other frontline assault vehicles of comparable size and strength. But to make up for its slow rate of fire, it also had the capability of carrying troops in order to deploy directly to the front lines. It was a female Chiss by the name of Severance Tan was employed by Dooku before the Battle of Geonosis to act as a field commander. She was not only a brilliant tactical mind, but was also force sensitive, even trained as one of Dooku's dark acolytes. However, she mainly focused on being a general rather than fighting with a lightsaber. The acolyte would set her sights on obtaining the Decimator war machines from the Republic and blazing a campaign through a number of worlds. After her work in the first battle of Geonosis, she would participate in the first battle of Tatooine, where she pried information about the Decimators from Bukra the Hutt. Afterwards, she captured the machines from research facilities on the world of Iraden, and then obtained the activation codes from Raxus Prime. Once she finally had full activation of the war machines, she would capture the world of Sarapin with their power. In the process, she would murder the Jedi Knight Jor Drakus. Tan's bold moves drew the attention of the Jedi Council, who would then dispatch Master Ichu Shen-Jon to deal with the issue. Covertly, Master Shen-Jon would be drawn into a fight because he had a personal score to settle with Tan. During the first battle of Geonosis, Tan was responsible for the death of his own Padawan, Stam Reth. It also turned out that the council would dispatch him alongside the Padawan, not Reth, the sister of the deceased student. The two took their battalion of clones and engaged Tan's forces in the second battle of Sarapin. Because of Shen-Jon's own tactical brilliance, they would come out victorious, forcing General Tan off the world. Shen-Jon led forces in pursuit of Tan across a couple more worlds before eventually tracking her to the world of Krant. The whole time he was battling temptations of the dark side over his need for vengeance. On one of the moons of Krant, he seized a Trade Federation facility, which was to be used as a staging ground for an invasion of the planet. However, Nat Reith was captured by Tan and was being held hostage. This caused Shen-Jon to descend further into the darkness that had been plaguing him the entire war. Arriving on Krant, Shen-Jon blazed a warpath through several CIS bases, recapturing the Decimator facilities and attacking Tan's own stronghold. There, Tan used Nat Wraith as leverage to force Shen-Jon into a 1v1 duel. The Jedi was furious and murdered the Chiss in combat. However, afterwards, the Jedi was ashamed at his dark actions and would therefore go into exile. But the Separatists were not done with their superweapons, not by a long shot. As the Republic and the CIS reached a deadlock in the first month, Dooku decided to do things a little old school, to take inspiration from the ancient Sith. In his research, he uncovered tales of a powerful weapon known as the Dark Reaper, which had long ago been used by the Sith Lords Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma. The Dark Reaper was a large machine that had the ability to harvest the life force from an entire army of organic beings. However, the machine had been split in the thousands of years since it was last used, and the first step was acquiring its power source, the Force Harvester. The only way to find that would be to excavate the tomb of Ulic Qel-Droma, to commune with his spirit to find out where the Force Harvester really was. And so, in a move that surprised the Republic, the Separatists attacked Ren Var with overwhelming force. The planet was manned only by one small station known as Bravo Base, and they were woefully unprepared to handle such an immense attack. Obi-Wan and Anakin detected the battle fleet before they arrived, and quickly called for an evacuation. Attempting to take them head-on was out of the question now. Both Obi-Wan and Skywalker worked together to get every man off of the world, desperately moving as quickly as they could as more and more Separatist crafts touched down. Eventually they were able to escape, but Ren Var had fallen to the Separatists. Dooku managed to learn from Qel-Droma that the Forced Harvester was hidden on Raxus Prime. The Republic scans quickly picked up unusual activity on the planet, and so once again, Obi-Wan and Skywalker were sent with a task force to investigate. This investigation turned into a full-scale battle, however, with the Republic bringing out their walkers and a full battalion in a surprise conquest of the Separatist capital world. But a new Separatist war machine known as the Proto-Deka completely obliterated the Republic's strike force, leaving only Obi-Wan and Anakin alive. Anakin was captured, and Dooku would have executed him, but Palpatine told the Count to release him since he had plans for the Jedi in the future. But while Dooku didn't have the full power of the Dark Reaper, the Force Harvester was still strong enough as a weapon as it was. It contained all of the power of the Reaper, just on a smaller scale. Dooku would test the Harvester on the Wookiee-populated world of Alaris, but luckily, Anakin had followed him there, and helped the Wookiees defend their planet until the Republic could arrive. Once the backup arrived, the Separatists were sent into a full retreat. But Dooku continued to unleash the Harvester's power on worlds such as Mon Calamari, Agamar, and Bakura. Because of its incredible power, no one could do anything to stop Darth Tyrannus. And soon the Jedi realized that the only way to stop this terror was to ask the man who stopped it during his original reign of terror, a man named Ulic Qel-Droma. Anakin would lead an assault on the world of Ranvar and successfully recaptured the world. Then, he ventured into Qel-Droma's tomb and communed with the ancient Jedi turned Sith turned back to Jedi. After defeating the spectral guardian spirits which protected the tomb, Anakin confronted the spirit of Ulic and informed him of what the weapon was doing. Ulic would then teach Skywalker the secret to withstanding the Dark Reaper's Force Drain effect. Anakin managed to learn this technique in a matter of hours, as only the Chosen One could. So now, armed with the power to stop this terrible weapon, Anakin went off to find the Count. They would locate him on the ancient world of Thule, where he had again constructed the Dark Reaper, which was magnifying the already terrible power of the Force Harvester. This would lead to the climactic Battle of Thule, where a staggering number of Jedi generals attacked Dooku's forces with Skywalker as their secret weapon. Yoda, Mace Windu, Luminara Unduli, Obi-Wan, and Anakin would all participate in this massively coordinated strike. They began with Thule's moon, moved into the atmosphere, and then battled their way to the ground. The fighting was extremely heavy, with the Republic allocating a significant amount of ships and resources to this sole conquest. But Dooku had both the Separatist droid army and his own personal mercenaries that he had hired to fight for him. Anakin fought his way directly to the Dark Reaper, which Dooku had activated before his escape. Once Anakin defeated a strong mercenary guarding it, he systematically brought the Dark Reaper down piece by piece under the guidance of Ulic Qel-Droma's spirit. At last he destroyed the Force Harvester powering it, rendering the weapon useless and defeated. The aftermath was somewhat bittersweet. Although this terrible event had been averted, much had been lost in the process, and as the Republic loaded up to join the battle in the Murgashir system, Yoda commented that the war was far from over. Not to mention that this event inflated Anakin's ego to a huge degree. Having gained secret knowledge from Ulic Qel-Droma, Anakin felt invincible, and he began to act more arrogantly towards his master Obi-Wan. As the first year of the Clone Wars proceeded, it began to become evident that the end of the war was not going to be as swift as either side was hoping. Some battles occurred and were over within a day or two, but in other very unlucky cases, the soldiers of the Republic and the Confederacy had to dig in for an extended standoff. This was the case with both the Foros Siege and the Battle of Ataken, both of which began sometime in early to mid-22 BBY. The Foros Siege occurred when the Republic blockaded the Techno Union's Foros shipyards. This was one of the main manufacturers for the entire Separatist fleet. The siege lasted 2 full years, until it was finally broken by the Separatist Admiral Dua Ningo sometime in 20 BBY. But the Battle of Atrakin would have greater repercussions than the siege ever did. The world of Atrakin had the unlucky privilege of being rich in dunium, an alloy very important to starship hull construction. The two sides of the war seized the planet for its resources, but would end up stuck there for a very long time. Atrakin was a backwater planet that was far from the major Republic supply chains. This hampered the clones' efforts to make the necessary assault there. Meanwhile, the Separatists employed more biochemical weapons on their enemy. Locked into a stalemate, the two sides were entrenched in a campaign that lasted an entire year. As a result, the world of Atrakin was absolutely devastated, rendering it completely uninhabitable. An estimate 90% of the planet's populace were also poisoned or killed in the fighting. The remaining survivors fled to other worlds. This was the very first campaign that officially proved to the Republic that they would not be able to win the war by waging it clean. But on a softer note, the raid of Penagalan 4 was one of the first events that saw the widespread adoption of nicknames by the clones. Before this, all of them were content with going by their CT numbers. One of the first to receive a nickname was ARC Trooper A-17, who was simply called Alpha by Anakin. Anakin didn't like the idea of calling the clones by their serial numbers, since it made them sound too much like droids while they were fighting. But on the world, a division of clones were sent to destroy a diamond boron missile facility. These state-of-the-art missiles were designed to shoot down Republic starfighters. Accompanying this division was a cowardly Republic accountant by the name of Joram Kaith. The battle began as soon as they arrived. Most of the platoon was shot down and killed upon dissension. The Republic called for a full retreat, but Joram's gunship was shot down into the chaos. And so the mission was left to him and his small squad of surviving clones to take out the factory themselves. While on the mission, Joram despised calling the clones by their numbers because it was hard to keep up with who was who, and so he assigned nicknames to them based on events that they were involved in. One clone who had lost a tooth was named Tooth. Another who dug graves for the fallen clone brethren was named Digger, and so on and so forth from there, continuing on with names like Mapper, Spots, Spade, Wrench, and Hash. The clones received their nicknames with indifference at first, but took to them quickly in the field, as it proved to be a vastly more efficient way for them to give out squad orders. Because of this, they were able to formulate an effective plan to infiltrate and destroy the missile factory. After the mission, Tooth revealed to Joram that they were not regular clones, but were in fact elite bred. However, he told Joram to write in his report that they were regulars in order to inspire other clones of the Grand Army to operate on an elite level. This report is likely what led to the widespread adoption of nicknames by all of the other clones in the first and the second generation in the first year. During the early years of the war, the role and treatment of the clone troopers was subject to intense debate among both the Jedi, politicians, and military commanders. There were many of them who saw them as products, factory-grown units to be thrown in as cannon fodder. Basically, just a single level above droids. Even some Jedi had this thought, and carried that prejudice with them the entire war. But many others saw them as real people to be cared for, and treated like organically recruited soldiers. But before the clone troopers had official rights, High Command treated them with negligence, and saw them as sacrificial pawns. And as we saw in the event with Kakruk, many of the clones saw themselves as expendable as well. But soon this thought process would change, thanks of course to the likes of Yoda. Yoda, who claimed that each individual clone that he saw separately in the Force. One of the first cases of Yoda's Jedi compassion towards the clone was on the Battle of Axion. Originally, this had been a human colony before it was brought under by the Colicoids, an insectoid builder race working for the Separatists. It had been turned into a research lab developing dangerous new weapons. A Republic force was sent to Axion under Commander Brolis, and they successfully penetrated the Colicoids' fortress. However, the insects called for help, and an army of droids arrived on Axion, decimating the clone forces. Only Brolis himself was left trapped on the world. He called out for help, but it all fell on deaf ears. The Republic High Command deemed Axion a failure, and were silent to Brolis' distress signal. However, backup arrived in the most unlikely of individuals, Grandmaster Yoda. Yoda, who took it upon himself to reinforce Brolis. Yoda would then single-handedly dismantle an attack wave of battle droids, and then defeat a Hellfire droid with the Force. Yoda would rescue Brolis, and the two of them escaped. But Axion remained lost to the CIS. The research labs the Separatists had dotted the galaxy that now were perpetually coming up with new and inventive weapons to use against the Republic. The Confederacy of Independent Systems did not concern themselves with their public image, because they already perceived themselves as having the moral high ground. To the Separatist, the Republic was the corrupt bureaucrats that needed to be knocked down a few pegs, and so they employed any means necessary to win the day. Carefully curated propaganda by Dooku and the Separatist leaders ensured that the Confederate public also never knew the full extent of their crimes. Yet another one of these said weapons would come up in the form of the Storm Fleet. This fleet was made up of the Separatists' largest battleships and all put into one collective. The idea was to use the overwhelming firepower to conquer any planet through sheer brute force. It was a lot like what the Empire would do in the future with their vast fleets of Star Destroyers. However, due to the heroics of a dynamic duo, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, this storm fleet would not get very far at all. Anakin had first found the fleet disguising itself in the Loan Nebula. There, the two Jedi infiltrated the spaceport and discovered the fleet's first destination was the Republic-controlled world of Sifar. Once the Storm Fleet began heading towards the target world, Anakin took off in his own personal starfighter and delayed the fleet by destroying two of their ships. This gave the Republic enough time to mount a sizable defense on Sifar, and once the Storm Fleet arrived, they were already crippled and swiftly destroyed by Republic forces. Across the stars, there was a different kind of trouble brewing though, not one of weapons, but one of the dark side of the Force. On Mace Windu's home planet of Harun Kal, Depa Billaba had been sent to train the naturally Force-sensitive Kurani people to fight the Separatists. However, due to the terrors of the war and the supernatural dark energies of the planet and its jungle, Depa had lost her mind and fallen to the dark side. Windu was sent to bring her back to the Jedi for rehabilitation, but when he arrived, he found that she had joined forces with a powerful Darksider by the name of Kar Vaster and his squad of Koruani warriors. Windu would eventually defeat both Vaster and Billaba, but not without suffering great injury first. While this was happening, a Separatist colonel, who was now also a militia leader, attacked Harun Kal, hoping to kill both Windu and the strong Koruani warriors. The colonel managed to disguise his vulture droids as floating debris around the planet, and to lure the Republic reinforcements into a trap above the world. On the surface though, Windu would work alongside Kar Vaster to fight for their planet, eventually managing to confuse the droid soldiers into attacking the colonel's militia successfully. During the battle though, Windu was once again forced to fight Kar Vaster once he went off the edge and began slaughtering indiscriminately. Ultimately, the battle would be won with a mix of courage, espionage, and the power of the Koruani people. Kar Vaster was later imprisoned at the Jedi Temple, and Depa Billaba would fall into a coma from which in Legends continuity she would never wake. Obi-Wan Kenobi was thereafter given her seat on the Jedi High Council. This event was a great reminder to the Jedi that the dark side was on the rise, and the Confederacy of Independent Systems was not their only enemy. The dark side was at work, and the Sith were as well. But back to the battlefront. Whether one was using fleets, super weapons, or powerful fortresses, one thing remained the same. Control was key. Single planets often held the fate of the war in their hands simply because of their position on certain hyperlanes. This was the case with the Battle of Brental IV. The Republic had received information that the Separatist stronghold would be lying dormant for several weeks, unoccupied, which opened a window for opportunity of attack. The world was a vital link between the Perlemian trade route, a hyperlane connecting the core worlds, and the Tion cluster of the Rim. Holding this planet would be of great significance to the war effort, and so the Republic dispatched a team of 4 Jedi for this mission. Shaak Ti, Egan Kolar, Shan Khan Ray, and Plo Koon, who would coordinate from orbit. But as it turned out, their intel was bad, and the stronghold was fully operational and ready for combat. A grand battle ensued with the Separatist forces striking, falling back, regrouping, and striking again. When the battle seemed to be in the turning point of the favor of the Separatists, Shan Khan Ray would contact Plo Koon. They were badly outnumbered, and Master Ray was in favor of a full-on retreat. Their communications were barely complete before his ship was shot down, killing him and all of his clones. Shaak Ti believed that they still had a chance to prevail though, and sent word to Plo Koon that she was going to attempt to rally the Republic forces at the fortress for one final push. However, the only forces that managed to make it to the fortress itself were a measly 4 clone troopers. But once inside, the brave clones discovered the true purpose of the fortress. It was a prison. This would be the key to their victory. Shaak Ti promised the prisoners their freedom if they would help bring the fortress down. On top of this, whether a stroke of luck or the will of the Force, Jedi Master Quinlan Vos was among these prisoners. Vos had been lost to the Jedi for some time now, and with him found, they not only reclaimed an ally, but received powerful support to take down the fortress. The team split up and took about sabotaging the ion cannons, setting charges beneath the structure. Master Shaak Ti herself fought and defeated their leader, Shogar Tok. Tok was the individual who had first inspired the planet to secede and to join the Confederacy. Keeping systems from joining the Separatists was of great prerogative to the Republic at this point. They were bleeding systems day by day as more worlds wanted a taste of independence that the CIS was promising. Directly following Brental IV though, would be the world of Randili. Word came from Randili that the planet was home to the Randili Star Drive Corporation, the producer of the Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers, and that this world was also possibly going to join the Separatists. Chancellor Palpatine and the Galactic Senate ordered a Jedi-led task force to the world of Randili. Their mission was either to convince the Randili Home Defense Fleet to remain with the Republic, or if they failed, to destroy them lest they fell into the hands of Dooku. Leading the mission in the Republic fleet was Jedi Master Plo Koon and Captain Jan Dondana, a man whose name would later be recognized as one of the most influential leaders in the Rebel Alliance. The leader of the Rendili fleet was Jacen Dallin, a man who Plo Koon and Dodonna knew personally from the Stark Hyperspace War many years earlier. Upon arrival, the Republic force discovered that an independent provisional government had already assumed power over Rendili and joined with the Separatists. Plo then went to speak with Jace anyways, hoping that perhaps they could appeal to his morality and therefore gain the help of the Rendili fleet. Despite some initial reluctance though, Dallin agreed to order the fleet to defect to the Republic. But then Dallin's own lieutenant, with the help of other junior officers, arrested the 3 men and the other defecting officers for treason against Rendili. Lieutenant Yago used them as hostages, preventing an immediate attack. Hoping that Sei Tin, commanding the Republic fleet, would hold off firing for at least 20 hours. That would be the time at which General Grievous had promised a Navy support group would arrive to the world. Plo, however, warned the young lieutenant that Sei Tin was not a Jedi who let his personal attachments interfere with his sense of duty. On board the Republic flagship, Tin and Anakin Skywalker debated heavily what to do. Deciding that there was no way to save the hostages, Sei wished to destroy the Rendili fleet ship. But Anakin was convinced that he could set charges on the rear of the cruisers, leaving them stranded in space due to a flaw in their original Mandalorian design. Both Sei Tin and Obi-Wan Kenobi refused this course action and ordered the Republic to open fire and for their starfighters to engage. Undeterred, Anakin had the charges loaded onto his personal starfighter and took matters into his own hands. Despite being aggravated at Anakin's disobedience, Kenobi did see this plan had a chance at success, and so he took Quinlan Vos with him to infiltrate the Rendili command ship. Anakin's charges went off as planned, leaving the enemy ship stranded and unable to jump to hyperspace. On board, Quinlan and Kenobi liberated the prisoners, and Dallin personally shot his traitorous lieutenant. Reclaiming command of his fleet, he then had all of the mutineers executed, joining the Republic fleet in repelling Grievous's forces once they arrived out of hyperspace. In the aftermath of the battle, the independent provisional government was presumably quickly subdued as Rendili returned to the Republic by the end of the war. Their planet's fleet was taken to Coruscant to be refitted and to use in their war effort against the Separatists. At Palpatine's urging, the Senate passed a resolution that mandated that all defense fleets should be assimilated into the Republic's navy in order to prevent a similar situation from arising in the future. But of course, this was all to get a step towards the grand plan. By assimilating more power to the central military while weakening local systems, this laid the groundwork for the fleet power held by the Galactic Empire in the future. This battle also enabled Quinlan Vos to officially return to the Jedi Order and to be acquitted of all of his crimes, as heretofore he had fallen to the dark side and become an agent of Dooku for quite some time, before denouncing this path. But what many recognized is that this battle was only a success thanks to Anakin, who took matters into his own hands with a risky but a brilliant plan. He saved the lives of his comrades, helping the Republic secure Rendili, and gave more power to the Republic fleet. Anakin had already gained a reputation among the Order, but in this next stretch of the war and in his career, he would define himself to the public as the hero with no fear. But that title and reputation would not come without many hellish tests for the young Jedi. We now reach the mid-year, Anakin's trial. Already, Anakin had exceeded what could be expected of most Padawans during wartime. It is not a stretch to say that the entire war effort may have completely turned on the Republic had it not been for Anakin. But soon, the Jedi Order would come to see the true usefulness of this hard-headed, yet spontaneous youth. And while many in the Council were resistant to awarding him the rank of Jedi Knight, their hand would be forced after Anakin's next string of experiences. And this would all begin with the Cortosis battle droid crisis. The Clone Wars by this point was giving anxiety to everyone on both sides of the war. It didn't seem as though the war was slowing down, and Yoda was growing more concerned about the Jedi's diminished power day by day. And it was in this environment that Dooku executed a disastrous plan involving a new line of battle droids. The CB-3 units were essentially B-2 super battle droids whose armor was made of the rare lightsaber neutralizing Cortosis ore. The Jedi Order would only learn of this when they received a mysterious distress call from Tatooine of all places. Dispatching Anakin to investigate, he ends up finding the man who sent the distress call, a smuggler named Rala Ponchar, who was hired by Wat Tambor to deliver Cortosis to the world of Metalorn. While there, he is ambushed by one of Dooku's dark acolytes, Sato. Anakin defeats the woman over a Sarlacc pit before being recalled back to Coruscant. The capital world was now under attack. Arriving back on the capital, Kenobi informs his Padawan that the battle droids were infiltrating the underlevel of the city. But when Anakin goes to investigate, he is confronted by yet another one of Dooku's dark acolytes, a person by the name of Trenox. Trenox pursues the man through the underlevels of Coruscant, only to find Dooku there inexplicably and threatening to steal information from the Jedi archives. Anakin is forced to fight one of the tough new Cortosis battle droids as Dooku flees. After a grueling duel, Anakin is able to put it down before making it directly into the temple. Obi-Wan is left injured by Dooku, and the Dark Acolyte Trenox is in the middle of trying to destroy the archives. After a very brief duel though, Anakin ends his life but was unable to catch Dooku in time. After a meeting with the High Council, Anakin is sent to finish the mission by going to Mandalore in order to confiscate the plans of the CB3 units and arrest Wat Tambor. Upon arriving, Anakin finds a specialized factory in full production of the new droids. Resolving to destroy the factory, he ventures deeper into it, confronting more strange droids, and even a Force-created doppelganger of Dooku. In the end, Anakin's mission is successful and he destroys the factory, defeats the weaker doppelganger of Dooku, and apprehends Wat Tambor. Following this, the Council commends Anakin for his accomplishments, and privately, Mace Windu and Yoda acknowledge how rapidly the boy's power is growing. Unfortunately though, sometime afterwards, Wat Tambor would be rescued and captured by hired bounty hunters. This, of course, had been Palpatine's doing, as he had requested that Tambor be kept under his personal guard. It was in his best interest to keep the Separatist leaders all liberated, at least for now. Concurrently to these events though, was the Battle of Nadiem. Here's where General Grievous was making more of a name for himself. The Separatists invaded Nadiem with Grievous at the helm. Eager to stop the monster, the Republic dispatched a large clone force led by Saesee Tiin, Luminara Unduli, Badar Tone, Barriss Offee, and the Star Dragon Jedi, Zeffatua Tor. Before long, the world of Nadiem erupted into a full-scale battle. General Tiin blockaded the world to ensure that the Separatists received no support, while the Jedi battled Grievous's forces on the ground. The fighting was brutal, as most of it happened within a tight canyon. Seeing that her forward position would be overwhelmed soon, Barriss would pull a brilliant maneuver to have her men lie still, pretending to be dead. This worked, and the droid army passed right over them to engage Luminara's position. Just then, Barriss and her troopers fired on the droid army from behind, catching Grievous's forces in a deadly crossfire from two sides. The Separatists were totally annihilated. Grievous would flee in his starship, but not before slaying Master Bundar Tone and taking his lightsaber as a trophy. The Star Dragon Padawan, remorseful and heartbroken over his master's death, flew up into the atmosphere of the world to follow and attack Grievous. Unfortunately, his emotion-filled pursuit ended in disaster, as the general turned the guns of his starfighter on the dragon, murdering him as well. Following this battle was an attempt by the Separatists to completely disrupt the HoloNet transmissions in a region of the Outer Rim to cripple the Republic's communication. The HoloNet was controlled by the Republic and was their main source of information flow. It was basically like our world's internet, but spanning across countless star systems and accessible only to the Galactic Republic. The Separatists had their own communication network, but they were eager to try to create blind spots in the Republic's HoloNet, so they attacked the Outer Rim world of Balamak with a small fleet. This was an important world that produced food, but also hosted a key HoloNet node. The Separatists blockaded the world and hijacked the node, broadcasting a jamming signal that disrupted all transmission networks in the entire sector. The jamming continued for 4 standard days until a Republic task force, led by General Obi-Wan Kenobi and Nada Rijano, engaged the fleet with a massive starfighter attack. As usual, it was Anakin Skywalker alone who delivered the game-winning shot by sending a missile volley that destroyed the jamming craft. But Anakin is not done. Anakin's next exploit saw him and Kenobi on the world of Sky, where they foiled a plot by a genocidal terrorist by the name of Zeta Mangus. Mangus, who threatened the planet with total annihilation. Following the battle, Skywalker discovered the 13-year-old Skagiti girl by the name of Karis, who proved to be strong in the Force. Anakin wanted to bring the girl back for Jedi training, but Obi-Wan believed that she was too old to start on the path of a Jedi, and refused to take her. However, Skywalker promised the girl that he would return one day to train her. Unfortunately, Anakin would eventually return, but not as a Jedi. But that is a story for another time, my friends. The Clone Wars were full of horrors and grim moments, but the most hopeless and traumatizing among them all was the Battle of Jabiim. This event would define Anakin's career and change him as a person forever. The Jabiim campaign is quite detailed and requires a lot of setup, so bear with me. Prior to the Clone Wars, a man by the name of Alto Stratus served as a commander of the Bronze Nimbus. This was one of several special forces units of Jabiim and its military. When he became disillusioned with the cowardice of his people and the lack of assistance from the Republic and the Jedi, he brought the Bronze Nimbus into his personal command. By the time the Clone Wars broke out, Alto Stratus was now the leader of the Jabiimi nationalists. He had consolidated the special forces of Nimbus commandos and took over the ruling Jabiim Congress with a coup before choosing to ally the planet with the Confederacy. After this act of treason, civil war broke out between the Stratus' nationalist faction and the remaining Jabiimi loyalists, led by a Captain Orlis. However, Orlis had negligible resources, thus his resistance was weak, so he reached out to the Republic for aid. Chancellor Palpatine authorized the Republic's intervention and sent an absolutely massive army led by a multiplicity of Jedi generals and their Padawans. This would of course include Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, along with ARC Trooper Alpha 17. The Republic also saw the rainy and muddy world of Jabiim as a great place to test their newest war machines, the All-Terrain Armored Transport, or the AT-AT. Hearing this, the Separatists would also back up the Nationalist army with battle droids and machinery of their own. Jabiim had now become a flashpoint that had erupted into full-blown chaos. The Republic forces established a stronghold at Shelter Base and proceeded to launch attacks on Separatist defensive positions in pursuit of Alto Stratus. Aided by the captain and the loyalist forces, the task force overran a dozen enemy positions with little resistance from the nationalists. During this, they did not find Stratus himself or any battle droids. During this time, the Jabiimite Separatists employed only the native soldiers and equipment while holding back their battle droids. As a part of his plan, Alto Stratus allowed the Republic to take the number of positions in order to divide their forces. Because their army was so overwhelmingly strong, Stratus conceded a number of positions to spread their lines as thinly as possible. By now, several Jedi Masters had died, and the orphanage Padawans formed their new group known as the Padawan Pack, vowing to comfort one another and watch each other's backs since their masters had perished in the battle. With the Republic forces now divided, Shelter Base was now only sparsely defended. Alto Stratus took advantage of a thunderstorm which disrupted long-range orbital scanners. The Republic failed to detect the massive wave of Confederate technology heading for Shelter Base, which included B-1s, B-2s, Spider droids, and Hailfire tanks. The Republic's AT-AT and AT-TE tanks were hampered by the muddy surface of the planet, making it hard for them to move. Many clone troopers were slaughtered, and Stratus himself killed a Jedi while she was distracted. Skywalker, Obi-Wan, Alpha, and a few of the Padawans arrived with reinforcements. With backup now arriving, Stratus felt it necessary to retreat. Alpha and Kenobi moved in to protect the walkers, including one AT-AT, and Kenobi intended to use the cover of the right flank. But in their retreat, the Jabiimi nationalists had planted charges, doing so to cover their escape and to cause more destruction as they fled. Anakin would watch in terror as the charges went off on the legs of the walker Kenobi and Alpha were taking cover behind, and in that instant, they were presumed killed in action. However, in reality, Ventress had captured the two of them while they were injured, transferring them to the planet of Ratadak for imprisonment. Filled with grief and also confusion at not having felt Obi-Wan die in the Force, Anakin would join the Padawan Pack as an orphan student. By the 13th day of the Battle of Jabiim, the captain estimated that 18 Jedi and 9,000 clones had been killed in action. That same day, the captain reported that their intelligence had located Stratus on the Razor's coast. He also believed that perhaps with their leader captured, that the other Separatists might surrender. Master Leska ordered to mobilize the troops for an immediate strike at the Razor Coast in an attempt to capture Stratus. Along with this, she ordered the Padawan Pack to avoid the front lines, to protect the supply convoy headed towards the Cobalt Station, as she refused to send more Padawans to their early deaths. The battle raged on. By the 32nd day, the Republic had lost 3 forward positions. The Padawan Pack had been able to defend the supply chain from an ambush of battle droids thanks to Anakin's quick thinking. But many of the other Padawans were sensing his growing instability, Anakin's impulsiveness due to the supposed death of Obi-Wan that was festering. Anakin's grief was beginning to consume him. By the 34th day of battle, as the Separatists had expected, the convoy was led into a minefield when one of the AT-AT stepped on the mine. This neutralized much of its armored support. The Jedi were unprepared for this sort of ambush, as it was the first time the Confederacy used mines in combat. The Republic again suffered heavy losses. They were able to fend off the ensuing ambush though from Stratus by using the Force to turn the mines against the Nationalists. Meanwhile, Master Laseka's forces on Razor Coast had suffered massive casualties, but had not yet found Stratus at all. They had determined that they were led on a wild bantha chase. Laseka decided it was time to head inland to protect the Padawan pack, and by the 37th day of battle, Laseka was distracted by a bright sun peeking out from behind the clouds. A brief moment of peace. Before she could reach the pack though, her troops were ambushed and she was murdered. As she lay dying, Laseka ordered the pack to run. The 9 Padawans were now the only remaining Jedi on Jabiim still capable of fighting, and the group took refuge in the Cobalt Station. By now, the Separatists had brought in their own reinforcements, however. A-series assassin droids which were modified specifically for duty of Jabiim. The captain contacted Cobalt Station and informed the Padawans that his Jabiimi loyalists and surviving clone troopers were gathering there. The Republic High Command, finally losing hope of victory though, announced the start of the evacuation of the world. And because the Jedi Master Leska was missing or dead, the Padawans were now the highest ranking officers on the entire planet. Unfortunately, the Republic transports were temporarily unable to land due to weather conditions, and Stratus had already assembled an army to completely crush his enemies and to kill the Padawans. The only thing that separated the evacuation zone and Stratus's army was Cobalt Station. The Padawans realized that the entire evacuation would depend on how long they could delay Stratus and the other Nationalists. But they knew that if they stood alone, it would be their end. With a rousing speech, the Padawan pack prepared to make their final stand. But that was when Anakin received a message that he was not expecting. A message from Chancellor Palpatine himself. Palpatine ordered Anakin to evacuate with the rest of the Republic forces. Anakin objected to this, as he didn't want to abandon the Padawan pack whom he had grown to care for, but he could not resist the will of the Chancellor. So with a heavy heart, Anakin left the Padawans to their deaths. On the 39th day, Alto Stratus attacked Cobalt Station with the intent to wipe it out. The battle between the Nationalists and the Padawan-led clone forces lasted about 4 days. But in the end, the Cobalt Station garrison was totally obliterated. Every single Padawan fought desperately, but were eventually slaughtered one by one. However, in the battle, they finally also managed to take out Alto Stratus, ending his reign of tyranny. By day 43, Anakin had returned to the evac site to meet with the captain, his loyalists, as well as the surviving clone troopers. However, the weather conditions only allowed a single Republic transport to make land. There was not enough time to take both the clones and the loyalists off of Jabiim. The decision on how to proceed with the evacuation had to be made within an hour as the weather continued to deteriorate. Anakin, as the only viable Jedi on Jabiim, was forced to make the decision. Anakin ordered all the clones to be evacuated and to abandon the loyalists to their fate. Shocked by the betrayal of the Republic, the captain came to realize that Stratus and the Nationalists were right. He struck Anakin across the face, and his Jabiim soldiers were ready to take the transport by force. But Anakin, having now been pushed over the line after the long battle, lost control and force-choked the captain. He then came to himself, however, apologized, before evacuating with the rest of the clones, as the Jabiimi loyalists shouted curses from below. This campaign deeply traumatized Anakin, and he would forever remember the sacrifices of his fellow Padawans, the supposed death of his master, and being forced to betray people that needed help. While he had received many swift victories thanks to his quick thinking and bravado, this was the one event that showed Anakin that he was not as invincible or powerful as he thought. He would later be consoled over the death of his master by Asherad Het, the Tusken Raider Jedi at the medical facility. Following this event, Anakin would be temporarily apprenticed by Ki-Adi-Mundi, as well as helped along by Asherad Het and his Padawan Bat Jewel, as the group would participate in the following battle of Araganar. Araganar was another typically unimportant world with very few natural exports, but one which held a strategic place since it was right on the border of the Republic and Separatist space. Jedi Master Asherad Het commanded the movement of his troops from his gunship until enemy fire brought them down behind enemy lines. The battle quickly turned against the Republic, and the clone forces were obliterated. During the fighting, an explosion would critically injure Bat Jewel. Anakin would attempt to force heal him, not wanting to see another Jedi die. But his efforts were fruitless, and Jewel perished in his arms. Due to an iron-charged sandstorm, Mundi and Boltar Swan were unable to reach Skywalker or Het, and so they called for a retreat. The two Jedi attempted to seek shelter in a cavern, where they had to fend off a sarlacc and avoid detection from the Separatist-aligned natives. Escaping through the cave, Anakin would be attacked by the natives and go into a berserker rage, slaughtering all of them while envisioning his massacre on Tatooine. Anakin accidentally attacked the Jedi Master head as well due to his Tusken appearance. Asherad put Anakin down though, and made him come to his senses. Burdened, Anakin revealed the truth of his slaughter of the Tuskens to Het. Asherad lectured him about the nature of vengeance, before promising to guard his secret with his life, believing that there was a dragon that Anakin had to slay on his own. The dragon within his heart. The two Jedi managed to find a disabled gunship after this, and used it to lure a giant predator into the Separatist army, giving the Republic time to retreat and to rescue the two young Jedi. For a short while, Anakin apprenticed to Mundi, but swore that he could still feel Obi-Wan alive in the Force. He would follow his feelings during one mission, though it was against Mundi's instructions. But Anakin would end up finding Obi-Wan and Alpha still alive, fighting for their lives after escaping Ventress's clutches. They rescued the two men, and Anakin was eagerly returned to Kenobi's tutelage. But despite this heartfelt reunion, Anakin's trials were far from over. After the Separatists lost Geonosis, they began using numerous worlds as manufacturing bases to feed their endless supply of battle droids. Zadja was one such world. Realizing that they needed a way to slow down the Separatist droid production, the Republic began formulating a variety of missions aimed at neutralizing as many of these factory worlds as they could. Anakin and Kenobi's first mission back would take them to Jedi Master Tomo on this mission. As an aside, while most stories of this time have been moved to the first few months of the Clone Wars, this was one that supposedly took place a year and a half into the war, and has not been corrected by Lucasfilm yet. Though Anakin is still considered a Padawan at this point, and its close proximity to Jabim and Ergonar, we are placing it right here for our own timeline. Anyway, the plan was that Obi-Wan and Skywalker would act as a diversion, that they would lead the clone troopers onto the field of battle to draw the Separatist forces away from the droid factory. Meanwhile, Tono was tasked to infiltrate the factory and destroy it using military-grade explosives. Although the Jedi was initially able to infiltrate the factory unnoticed, she was soon discovered by a large number of Geonosians. Fighting her way through a large number of the enemy, Tono was able to plant the majority of the explosives before more Geonosians caught up with her. Back on the field of battle, Anakin was restless and sensed that Tono's survival was in jeopardy. By this point, he was greatly struggling with how many Jedi had sacrificed themselves in this war for him. Over the comm, Anakin reassured her that he was inbound to her position with a gunship. However, Tono disregarded her own personal safety and ordered the young Padawan to remain with Obi-Wan and the clones. Anakin attempted to argue with her, but Tono was able to convince him that if he came after her, it would cause needless casualties among the troopers. Making peace with the Force, Tono sacrificed herself and detonated the charges. The resulting explosion was an enormous scale and completely destroyed the factory, as well as wiped out all of the Separatist forces that surrounded it. Anakin's journey through this crucible of horror would finally end with the Battle of Pre-Sitlin, but one that had been reluctantly conquered by the Republic. Though lightly defended, it held the state-of-the-art communications complex known as the Intergalactic Communications Center, and there had been around 50,000 clone troopers stationed there. Dooku tasked Ventress with retaking the planet, and so she would enlist the command of Admiral Porus Tonith, a Muun military commander from the Intergalactic Banking Clan. In a daring and a swift move, Tonith not only recaptured Pre-Sitlin, obliterating all of the Republic defenses there, but also blockaded one of the Republic's main shipyards, Sluis Van. On Pre-Sitlin, modified droid control ships broadcasted a system-wide jamming field that prevented the Republic garrison from sending out a distress call, and so the rest of the galaxy remained unaware of what was happening until a leader of the Resistance called the Freedom Sons managed to send a message to the Republic and ask for help. The Jedi Council would dispatch a naval group under the command of Master Nija, as well as Anakin to deal with the issue. The two Jedi arrived just in time to save the Freedom Sons from being totally wiped out by an attack from Porus Tonith. The Republic fleet meanwhile engaged the Separatist fleet and managed to win a tough skirmish, taking controls of the sky of Pre-Sitlin. The military transports of the Grand Army landed on the surface, forcing Admiral Tonith to withdraw his droids to defensive positions around the Intergalactic Communications Center, rallying his troops there. Skywalker and his Jedi companion met up with the Freedom Sons and began planning their next attack, but then they were contacted directly by Admiral Tonith. The Admiral told them that survivors of the original garrison were being held hostage in the communication center and would be executed unless the Republic ceased its attack. Ninja, Skywalker, and the Resistance leader attempted to carry out a feint at the center of the battle droid formation though, while their main force would attack the Separatist right flank. Unfortunately though, due to bad intel, the right flank was better guarded than they had expected, and their initial attack ended in failure and heavy casualties. But then, Anakin concocted Plan B. Rather than a large frontal assault, Anakin would take a small, but an elite commando unit into the communication center itself. Focus on liberating the hostages, then the Republic could attack without fear of reprisal. Ninja and the leader agreed to this plan, and they would begin the rescue mission. Things were going as planned, with Anakin's unit meeting the expected amount of droid resistance within the center. Once he got the hostages out, however, he was stunned to find that one of them, the chief administrator of the facility, bore a striking resemblance to his mother, Shmi Skywalker. But in the ensuing fight, the administrator threw herself in front of Anakin to save him from a stray blaster bolt, resulting in her death instead. For Anakin, seeing this woman die was like reliving his mother's death all over again, and it sent him into yet another frenzy. Letting his rage reign free here, he set off in a rampage against the surviving droid units. The freed hostages and the commandos returned to the transports, but they were attacked by droids, and were forced to leave without Anakin. The young Jedi continued to pave a path of destruction towards the headquarters of Taunith, and Anakin cut his way into the facility. Skywalker forced the Separatist admiral to surrender, but was ready to execute him anyway. However, he stayed his hand when he heard the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn reach out to him, telling him to stop. Although Taunith was defeated and the communication center was recaptured, the Battle of Pre-Sitlin was not over yet. Taunith had sent requests for reinforcements to Asajj Ventress, and a cloaked Separatist fleet just arrived to the world. Anakin jumped into his starfighter and led a counterattack on the Confederate cavalry. Anakin's attack was successful, and he managed to destroy their capital ship, forcing them into yet another retreat. Master Ninja had originally thought young Anakin died in the ensuing explosion of the capital ship, but was mystified when the Jedi Padawan returned unharmed. The day was finally won. On Coruscant, Ninja would tell the Jedi High Council of all of Anakin's heroics, how the young Jedi had single-handedly won the battle for the entire world. The entire council then held a special session on the subject of Anakin's knighthood. Many believed that he showed too many brash tendencies. His arrogance was dangerous to let loose without supervision. But many others who had witnessed Anakin's brilliance firsthand, his courage, including Obi-Wan, advocated for his knighthood. Soon the vote towards the positive was overwhelming, and Anakin was given a special knighting ceremony, one much different from how it ordinarily went. Rather than being given time to meditate and prepare for his ceremony like other Padawans, Obi-Wan surprised Anakin with it, leading him to the council chambers directly. There, it was completely dark, illuminated only by the council's lightsabers. Grandmaster Yoda himself would carry out the oath-giving and slice off Anakin's Padawan braid. After all of his suffering, all of his fighting, all of his saving, Anakin Skywalker was officially a Jedi Knight. Although this monumentous occasion meant the absolute galaxy to Anakin at the time, Anakin knew, as well as everyone else, that his knighthood meant that both freedom and much more responsibility was coming his way, especially in the ensuing days of the Clone War. The flames of conflict had not yet been doused out, and was worse, continuing to spread. And so now we enter the late year, with no end in sight. It has been several months since Geonosis, and already the galaxy was getting exhausted and anxious with all of the fighting. The Republic had been hoping for a quick resolution to the war. After all, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine was talked about as being a voice of peace and sure action. Not only this, but the Republic had the Jedi Knights on their side, the guardians of peace and justice that had always saved the populace just in time. But imagine the surprise of Republic citizens when their valiant Jedi were struggling to quell the Separatist movement. This generation of the Republic had only experienced the Jedi's protection during times of peace. In the 1,000 years since the Sith Wars, there was no conflict that arose with the Jedi that they could not take care of in a matter of weeks. But with the Clone Wars, the Jedi's vulnerability was on full display. They were not this omniscient, all-powerful protectors that they touted themselves to be, and the Confederacy of Independent Systems were beginning to scare the Republic, especially its citizens. The droid army was powerful, Grievous was seen as an unstoppable monster of death, and Dooku was a cunning opponent who continued to bring more and more systems to the Confederacy day by day. While no one knew his identity as a Sith Lord, it was common knowledge that he was once a Jedi, and that a reputation of wisdom and pragmatism made him appear all the more capable and all the more threatening. By now, Palpatine's propaganda campaign was in full swing. On the home front, the HoloNet was alive with news of the war. It was the Chancellor's long-term plan to make the citizens as dependent on the government and dependent on the military as possible. And so all of the bad defeats were downplayed, and all of the victories were exaggerated. All in an effort to make it appear as though the Republic was winning the war. A special amount of emphasis was given to the actions of the Jedi. Palpatine wanted the public to see their strange powers in the Force, their supernatural battlefield feats on display. While one may believe that this would make the public feel safer, in some regards, the powers of the Jedi were extremely frightening, and Sidious knew it. Many had not actually seen the Jedi in action, only heard tales of them, but now watching powers beyond their understanding had a roundabout way of making the public uneasy. Some found comfort in their protectors, but others wondered, if the Jedi were so powerful, why would they not defeat the Separatists? Why was the war dragging on? This in turn made the public even more afraid of the CIS and Grievous, who were killing Jedi by the handful every single day. Certain mainstays of the war were also taking shape, such as the individuality of the clones and the odd quirks of the B-1 battle droids. Within the Senate, more serious debate was being had about the rights of the clones and what they had as sentience. These talks were exacerbated as more and more of the holovids of the troopers' heroism were becoming more and more popular, especially with the younglings of the galaxy who were becoming inspired towards patriotism. In the clone ranks, widespread adoption of nicknames had also become the norm, with some earning niche labels through battlefield accolades, and others giving themselves more average names to feel like they were a part of the Republic populace. But the clones were not the only beings showing a startling amount of individuality. On the Separatist side of things, they were noticing that their B-1 battle droids were becoming oddly chatty. Following the Trade Federation's defeat on Naboo, they ordered many of the first-gen B-1s to be retrofitted with cognitive modules that allowed independent thought. This prevented more remote shutdowns, and allowed the Separatists to teach the droids new things by uploading new programming. B-1s were then programmed for a number of roles, such as crewing battleships, driving artillery vehicles, and starship piloting, as well as emergency signals, and a number of other tasks. But the B-1s were being pushed to the limits of their programming. Retrofits allowed them to perform more specialized tasks, but they weren't very good at them. Droid maintenance was also becoming a problem simply because there were so many of them. Without proper maintenance, many early B-1's cognitive modules suffered data corruption and system errors, leading to behavioral anomalies. To the annoyance of the Separatist commanders, retrofitted B-1s often became talkative, offering running commentaries on their situations as their modules struggled to process data. But as the war raged on, everyone dreaded the truth. The war was not ending anytime soon. Back on the battlefield, we'd see the early missions of some of the most notable clone troopers, such as Captain Rex, Commander Cody, and Commander Gree, all of whom participated in the Battle of Tibrin. The natives of the planet, the Ishi Tib, were originally under the subjugation of a tyrannical dictatorship, one who was loyal to the Republic. When Dooku and his acolytes arrived on the world, they were welcomed with fanfare from the people, especially after Dooku executed their dictator and overthrew his totalitarian regime. The Ishi Tib sided with the Separatists, and soon the Republic would send a clone force led by General Kit Fisto to retake the world. The Ishi Tib would support the Separatist army during this battle, resulting in a catastrophic defeat for the Republic. Many of the clones, including Commander Gree, would sport the double strip haircut in honor of their fallen brothers, honoring their bravery following such an exhausting and grueling campaign. Meanwhile, a Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker and a newly dubbed Master Obi-Wan Kenobi continued to work closely together. Now no longer master and apprentice, they were good friends and knew how to work with each other to maximum efficiency to win nearly any battle. They were making a name for themselves as the heroes of the Republic and the scourge of the Confederacy. This began with their victories at Anoth and Bakura, where they defeated General Grievous' forces both times. But the first real challenge to their new ranks would be the Battle of Christophsis. This battle would prove to be one of the most important conflicts of the early war, as Christophsis served as an extremely important role for multiple reasons. As we said at the beginning, the biggest struggle of the Clone Wars Year 1 was establishing the most strategic placements on the galactic map in relation to hyperspace lane control. Taking Christophsis would allow the Separatists to cut off Republic forces from the Outer Rim, while at the same time providing a staging point for strikes on planets like Kamino and Rothana. Rothana was the headquarters of Rothana Heavy Engineering. This provided a great deal of the Republic war machine. The Separatists had also hoped to acquire Christophsis for its rich supply of crystals. which could serve as power sources for weapons. If this wasn't enough of a gain, Senator Bail Organa was on the planet with a city-based refugee camp as a part of the Senate rescue decree. His capture or his assassination would mean significant gains for the Confederacy because of how influential of a man Organa was in the Senate. The infamous and the brilliant Admiral Trench led the Separatist Navy into a blockade of Christophsis with a fleet of over 30 warships. Meanwhile, General Worm Loathsome launched a surface invasion with his droid army, quickly gaining significant ground. Bail Organa and his forces were trapped on the planet's surface and cut off from the Republic's supply lines. The oligarchs of the planet's government fled off-world, carrying as many riches as they could gather, leaving the remaining Christophan inhabitants to fend for themselves. A number of the natives attempted to defend themselves with their own arms, but were no match for the power of the droid army. It was General Loathsome that then broadcasted a planet-wide holo-transmission, one that told the civilian populace that they were under Separatist command, demanding that they submit to the occupation. Unfortunately for him, this had the opposite effect, as it gained the Jedi Order's direct attention. For this sensitive mission, the Council dispatched the reliable dynamic duo, Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. They were to assist in disrupting the Separatist invasion, to mount a rescue mission to deliver Organa's relief supplies through the blockade. They were joined by the newly appointed Admiral Wolf Yularen. However, Republic intel was bad, and reported that the Separatists were small in number on the planet. Due to this, Skywalker and Kenobi were only equipped with a small garrison of clone troopers from the 501st and the 13th Army, and expected to retake the planet with relative ease. The Jedi were unprepared when they encountered Trench's gargantuan blockade and the huge droid numbers on the surface. Skywalker and Kenobi's initial attempts to penetrate the blockade were met with failure, as Trench's position was too strong and his tactics too advanced. With the resources they had available, the Jedi were unable to properly engage the Separatist fleet. However, they could not wait for reinforcements, as Organa sent a message saying that they were running low on food, supplies, and munitions. To make matters even worse, Admiral Yularen had been doing some research and revealed to the Jedi that based on the tactics of the fleet and the markings of the flagship, they were facing Admiral Trench. Yularen had engaged him personally once before and was summarily defeated. They had no hope of beating him with what they had. But that was when Obi-Wan showed Anakin the stealth ship prototype they had with them, one that carried an experimental cloaking device. Anakin liked the idea of sneaking behind and attacking the Admiral directly, but Obi-Wan insisted that he instead ferry supplies to Organa past the blockade. While Skywalker was trying to do so, the Republic fleet waited on standby, which tipped off Trench that something was wrong. Trench decided to goad them into a confrontation by sending bombers to attack Organa's position on the surface. The bombers forced Anakin into a decision of whether or not to reveal himself or continue going to the planet. And so, ignoring Obi-Wan's orders, he engaged Admiral Trench's flagship alone. Skywalker and Trench would proceed to have a tactical fencing match as they worked to outsmart or outfly the other. Ultimately though, there was no pilot in the galaxy like Anakin Skywalker, and he would turn Trench's magnetic missiles against him, luring them right into the bridge of the flagship. Without the leadership of Trench, the Separatist blockade was not nearly as effective, allowing Obi-Wan to engage with the fleet and send more ships full of supplies to the surface, where Obi-Wan joined as well. After delivering supplies to the refugee camp, Republic forces attempted to ambush the droid army from a business center in one of the plazas of the capital city. However, the Republic's attack was foiled, as the Separatists were ready for them. This tipped off to the Jedi that there was a spy among their ranks, feeding information to the Confederates. While Skywalker and Obi-Wan went behind enemy lines, Rex and Cody rooted out the spy from among their men, a clone by the name of Slick with a prejudice against the Jedi. The group soon discovered that he had been feeding information to Ventress. Upon arriving at the CIS base, Anakin and Obi-Wan confronted the Dark Jedi and discovered an invasion force far greater than they had originally believed. Back at the Republic base, Slick was revealed to be the spy and sabotaged the Republic's weapons depot, destroying most of their supplies before Rex and Cody apprehended him. It was then when General Worm Loathsome would launch his main attack, heading right for the Republic base. Although vastly outnumbered, the clones were able to repel most of the droid army thanks to the leadership of Skywalker and Obi-Wan. But what kept Loathsome tanks from moving forward were the Republic's heavy artillery cannons, and so he ordered a temporary retreat. By this point, the Republic's supplies were running dangerously low, as the two Jedi were still working off the skeleton crew that they were just given for this single mission, a problem made all the worse by Slick's sabotage. The renewed Separatist blockade of Christophsis drove Yularen and the Republic fleet away from the world temporarily, but they were able to send a single supply ship through. But in a shocking turn of events, they were not given reinforcements, but rather a Padawan, a learner by the name of Ahsoka Tano, who had been assigned to Anakin Skywalker without his knowledge. Apparently, Yoda and the High Council were still dubious about Anakin's capacity for responsibility as a Jedi Knight, and so they elected that the best way to usher him into maturity would be to give him the accountability of training a Padawan. Anakin was revolted at this prospect at first, but he didn't have time to argue when the General Loathsome forces had returned, but this time under the canopy of a deflector shield, one that countered the Republic's artillery. Anakin and Ahsoka's tense relationship began with their first daring mission, to infiltrate enemy lines and destroy the shield generator. Obi-Wan, meanwhile, knew the Republic's position would be done for if the tanks reached the cannons, and so he would falsely surrender to the general in order to buy the two young Jedi time. Although the plan came dangerously close to failure, Ahsoka and Anakin managed to finish the mission and destroy the shields. Once that happened, Obi-Wan turned the tables on Loathsome and captured him while the Republic cannons finished off the Separatist forces. And with that, the Battle of Christophsis was won by the Republic. Following this battle, Master Yoda would touch down on the world and deliver the news of their next mission. The son of Jabba the Hutt had been kidnapped. In the ongoing effort of securing hyperlanes, rescuing Jabba's son would put the Republic in the good graces of the Hutts, allowing them to negotiate passage through Hutt space and territory. According to their intelligence, Rada the Hutt was being kept by the Separatists in wild space on the world of Teth. Anakin and Ahsoka went to rescue the Huttlet. However, they were unaware that they were headed straight into a trap set by Dooku. Dooku, who was intent on claiming the hyperlanes for the Confederacy. He had Ventress orchestrate Rada's capture with the help of Jabba's Uncle Zero. The end goal was to manipulate the Jedi and to turn Jabba against them in the war. Anakin, Ahsoka, Rex, and a team from the 501st arrived on Teth to find the battle droid presence keeping them from landing on the monasteries. What ensued was a vertical battle up the cliffside to the monastery plateaus. After breaking through the initial defenses, the two Jedi rescued the Huttlet, but the clone team was forced to barricade themselves in the stronghold when Ventress arrived with droid backup. Anakin and Ahsoka were forced to leave the clones behind in order to find Rada medical attention immediately, and nearly all of the clones in the company besides Rex were murdered by Ventress. At that moment, Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived with the 212th Attack Battalion in order to aid in the Jedi's escape. Jedi Master Obi-Wan would duel Ventress within the monastery, causing her to fail her mission in stopping Skywalker. Anakin and Ahsoka arrived to deliver Rada to Tatooine, but found Dooku waiting for them as the last line of defense for the Separatist plan. He had been spending his time planting seeds of venom in Jabba's mind towards the Jedi, using carefully constructed lies to turn him against them. But the new master and apprentice duel conjured a plan that would deceive Dooku. While Anakin dueled the Sith Lord in the Dune Sea, Ahsoka safely returned the Huttlet to its father, winning the Republic access to the crucial hyperlanes. All the while this was happening, Padme had been uncovering the conspiracy of Zero the Hutt and exposing the treachery to Jabba, further cementing the Hutt's good graces with the Republic. Although Anakin had been extremely apprehensive about taking on a Padawan learner of his own, Anakin quickly warmed up to Ahsoka following this event. And despite all the horrors he had been forced to witness in the Clone War, Ahsoka brought in a much-needed lightness to his life and to the battlefield, helping Anakin as much as he was about to help her. This win for the Republic would be huge and allow them to deploy forces much more quickly to the Outer Rim territories. One such victory benefiting from this new arrangement would be the Battle of Akashish, where Republic forces were battling the Trandoshan's moon in order to take down a cybernetic scientist by the name of Bit Paneth. This man had assisted in the creation of none other than General Grievous, and was currently working on creating a cyborg that was immune to the Force. After finding the location of this secret base, Jedi Master Bant Aaron and her Padawan, Jalen Koss, led the 18th Battalion to the world in order to destroy the secret base and to arrest the scientist. But one of the largest and most focal battlefronts in the entire war was Ryloth. This world was subjugated by the Techno Union due to Wat Tambor's interest in the planet and its people. The Twi'lek population was prized for its slaves, and the main export of Ryloth was a unique strain of spice known as Ryle. The Confederacy annihilated the Republic fleet defending the world, leaving supply lines severed, and the Twi'lek population without food or medical supplies. A leader emerged among them though, named Syndulla, who led a freedom fighter resistance against this oppression until the Republic was able to allocate resources to respond to the Separatists. Leading the campaign on Ryloth was Mace Windu, followed by General Kenobi, Skywalker, Tanis, and Commander Ahsoka Tano. The first phase of the mission was, as usual, to break the Separatist blockade. It was up to Skywalker and his Padawan to smash right through it. Using yet another fake surrender tactic, Anakin distracted the Separatist fleet long enough to crash an already doomed Star Destroyer into the command ship. Though suffering heavy losses in the process, the Republic made it through the blockade. High Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu, along with Commander Cody and Ghost Company, safely touched the surface of the world and executed Phase 2 of the plan. Eliminate the proton cannons to allow the rest of Windu's forces to safely land. This was largely achieved due to the unorthodox methods of 2 clones, Waxer and Boyle, along with a little Twi'lek girl, allowing them to free the hostages in the process. Phase 3 of the plan had Mace Windu take a lightning squadron to reclaim the city of Lesu. However, Windu's forces were heavily diminished by droid tanks on the cliffsides. Due to this, Windu had to convince Syndulla, as well as the freedom fighters, to fight for the Republic. Syndulla was none too impressed with the state of the Republic at all, mostly due to Ryloth's exploitative senator, Orn Free Taa. But after Wat Tambor bombed the villages, he set his differences aside and joined Mace Windu. With their combined strength, they managed to activate the bridge to Lesu City, which was the only means to access it. In the Battle of Lesu, the Republic and the Freedom Fighters defeated the Separatist droid army and captured Wat Tambor once again, mostly due to Tambor's rather independent tactical droid deciding to abandon him using Tambor's own escape shuttle. Afterwards, it was just a matter of cleanup, with Anakin and Ahsoka being left to root out the remaining CIS strongholds on the world. But it wouldn't be too much longer until they were called back into action again. This time, as General Grievous was back, and with a brand new weapon slated to turn the war on its head. Of all of the super weapons used by the Separatists, the ship known as the Muunilinst likely had the most potential for military supremacy. It was a subjugator-class heavy cruiser that was built with massive ion pulse cannons. These had enough power to completely disable any ships or technology caught in the blast, neutralizing their deflector shields and leaving them floating in dead space. The enemy would then totally be left vulnerable to the Dreadnought's turbo lasers, and like a scorpion, the Muunilinst stings its prey, leaving it helpless before devouring it. The Separatists managed to build their weapon in total secrecy, and when it was finally activated, Count Dooku put Grievous at the helm, knowing that his viciousness would complement the new superweapon extremely well. Its first appearance was in the Fu system, where it obliterated a Republic patrol of 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers, killing all of the crew and the Jedi generals. Dooku would then authorize Grievous to continue sieging the Republic's Starfleet, and this process would repeat over and over again. The Muunilinst would appear out of the blackness of space like a wraith, ambushing Republic patrols, taking them down each time. This harassment continued for months, with Palpatine making sure the attacks were broadcasted across the HoloNet, inspiring more fear in the citizens. The Jedi Council themselves assembled to figure out how to deal with this new superweapon, leading to General Plo Koon volunteering to find and to take down the mystery weapon. This would lead to the Battle of Ebrigado, where Plo Koon attempted to get the jump on the Muunilinst, but found himself ambushed in the process. His ships disabled, forcing him and his crew to jettison in their life pods. Dooku ordered for teams of space droids to go out and to kill any survivors, as he didn't want live witnesses to tell of the Muunilinst and its true power. Plo defended the last life pod of his troopers left, which included Commander Wolffe. Eventually they were found and rescued by Anakin and Ahsoka, who had just arrived in the system. But their escape meant knowledge of the Muunilinst, which they could then use for their next attack. This escape made Dooku consider this attack a failure, and his trust in Grievous was heavily diminished. The general decided then to prove himself, attacking more Republic systems which included Vanek, Iktor, Vondark, and soon the Rendelia system. This is where Grievous successfully destroyed a medical fleet. Dooku was pleased with these developments, which awarded Grievous some of his trust again. But the destruction of the medical fleet allowed the Jedi to predict that a medical station housed in the Khalida Nebula would be Dooku's next target. Arriving ahead of Grievous, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Plo Koon evacuated the medical center and set up a counterattack with Shadow Squadron. The Muunilinst soon arrived, but found its quarry well defended, leading to an open battle. Shadow Squadron suffered extreme casualties in their attack run, but Skywalker was able to damage the ion pulse cannon during its charge-up phase. The subsequent explosion crippled the superweapon's hyperdrive, and Grievous disengaged from the attack altogether in order to escape. However, Obi-Wan's task force arrived to pursue the fleeing general. Unfortunately, the situation became complicated when Padme arrived in the system for a political meeting. She was caught in the middle of the battle, taken captive aboard the Muunilinst, and used as a pawn for Grievous. After sending a message to Anakin, he ordered all Republic ships to cease fire. He would then be forced to board the ship itself with Obi-Wan. Kenobi went to dismantle the hyperdrive, and was quickly locked in a duel with the droid general. Meanwhile, Anakin and Padme went to the bridge, and set the coordinates of the Muunilinst to crash into a nearby moon. The Jedi managed to escape, and the superweapon was eventually destroyed. Much to Dooku's chagrin, Grievous fled the battle thereafter. The loss of this weapon would infuriate Dooku, causing him to orchestrate a leak of Grievous's secret lair on the third moon of Vasek, directly to the Jedi. In order to teach the general a lesson, Dooku disabled the lair's security, allowing Kit Fisto, Nadar Veb, and a team of clone troopers to infiltrate Grievous's lair and attack him at his home. Although the mission to Vasek was a failure on the Jedi's part, it came all too close to being Grievous's end. Following these events was the Battle of Bepor, where the Separatists were once again attempting to fill the void of superweapons left behind by the Muunilinst. The bounty hunter Kul Teska was planning to use a gravatic polarization beam to destroy Naboo's sun to prove his worth to Dooku. The Jedi were then sent to investigate, and found Teska's facility on the world of Bepor. The Republic dispatched Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Mace Windu to lead an attack on the facility and destroy the weapon. Skywalker and Obi-Wan infiltrated the base to destroy its shield generators, allowing Windu and Ahsoka to lead a main assault. But Dooku himself personally quickly arrived, interested in this new weapon which could replace the Muunilinst. While Skywalker and Tano dealt with the bounty hunter, Kenobi and Windu dueled the Count. The two members of the council were too much, and defeated Dooku, but were unable to kill him when he was rescued by Ventress. By that point, however, the power regulator of the gravatic beam had been sabotaged, and the entire facility was set to blow. The Republic forces all evacuated, leaving Teska to die in the exploding lab. Anakin and Ahsoka's next adventure would have them work alongside Aayla Secura and the 327th Star Corps in the Battle of Kel. In the skies over the primitive world, the Republic forces were ambushed by the CIS, leading to a fierce battle in the world's atmosphere. Both sides dispatched fighter squadrons, but it was the Republic who took the heavier casualties. 2 out of 3 Star Destroyers they had present were shot down. Things were about to get worse, as the Separatists were unveiling their new B-2 rocket troopers to infiltrate Secura's flagship. Anakin, Ahsoka, and a team of the 501st worked to evacuate the ship before it was destroyed. But the hero with no fear was actually wounded in the process: Anakin. The Jedi and several clones managed to escape aboard a Consular-class cruiser, but when the cruiser attempted to dock on Admiral Yularen's ship, an attack run by the Vulture droid squadron inadvertently activated the cruiser's hyperdrive system. The Jedi and the clones were unable to prevent the ship from jumping to hyperspace, leaving Yularen to continue the battle against the Separatist armada alone. The Battle of Kel ended in a Republic defeat, and the Jedi and the clone team found themselves on the world of Mara Dun. There they had to defend a pacifist village of natives from the Separatists testing a brand new bioweapon. The Confederacy was on the rise in this late year, and their streak of victories continued into the First Battle of Felucia. Grievous and Ventress worked together to take Felucia on, leading to Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka rushing to defend it, since they were the Jedi that had the most familiarity with them. However, the Jedi and their forces were soon overwhelmed by the deeply entrenched Separatist troopers, and the Republic reinforcements were sent to extract the Jedi from the world, believing it was too hotly contested. Ahsoka Tano stubbornly refused to retreat at first though, almost risking the deaths of herself and many of the Republic's men. But Skywalker managed to convince her to fall back and to evacuate. Unfortunately, the loss of Felucia would hamper the Republic efforts in the entire Thanium sector of the Outer Rim, and was a huge defeat. Falling back into the Mid-Rim, the Republic had to defend the world of Malastare. This world contained very important fuel reservoirs that the Republic relied on to maintain their offense on the Outer Rim. This was another battle that remained one of the longest conflicts of the entire war, presumably lasting months. Anakin and Windu, as 2 of the most successful Republic leaders, oversaw the campaign. The Separatists were not giving up easily on this one, and the tides of the battle were starting to turn. If something drastic wasn't done soon, the droid army would win this world as well. In a desperate attempt, Chancellor Palpatine authorized the use of an untested Republic superweapon of their own, the Electro-Proton Bomb. This bomb was capable of deactivating any technology by means of a massive EMP. Bombers dropped the Electro-Proton Bomb on the droid army and successfully obliterated their ranks, deactivating them by the thousands. However, the blast of the bomb created a sinkhole and awakened the Zillo Beast. The Zillo Beast was a massive and extremely powerful monster that the native dogs of Malastare believed was a harbinger of the end time. Its plated body was totally resistant to blasters and lightsabers, but the Republic was able to put it down with repeated blaster bolts from stun tanks. Palpatine then ordered for the beast to be taken back to Coruscant for study, hoping to understand the nature of its armor and potentially even incorporate its defensive utility into the armor of the Grand Army's troopers. However, the Zillo Beast was more intelligent than anyone predicted, and it seemed to understand the dark, hidden nature of Palpatine. It escaped containment and went on a rampage in Coruscant City, looking to find and to kill the Sith. Using the fuel from Malastare, the Republic was able to poison the creature and eventually kill it. Anakin Skywalker's final excursion of this year would take him to the raging space battle over Bathawi. Grievous had planned to invade this world, hoping to secure something from the Mid-Rim for the Separatists after the loss of Malastare. Anakin and Ahsoka took a fleet on newly constructed Star Destroyers in order to defend the precious system, as by this point in the war, the Republic had finally gained momentum on their industrial production yet again. In a brilliant move, Skywalker had Captain Rex set up a series of ATTE walkers on a nearby asteroid belt, which he then used to fire on Grievous's ships. During the dogfight, Anakin engaged Grievous and was able to lure him directly into the belt, where his forces were routed and the general himself attempted to flee in his own starfighter. However, during the chaos, Anakin's ship was badly damaged, and although Rex saved Anakin, his astromech droid R2-D2 was presumed lost in the debris. Having lost so many people close to him, Anakin refused to accept losing his little droid whom he had known since he was a child. While his attachment to R2 seemed a bit ludicrous to every other Jedi, including even Obi-Wan, Anakin refused to give up the search for his mechanical friend, and it was a good thing that he didn't give up the search, as Grievous had attempted to attain R2 himself, to pry the Republic's secrets out of the astromech. Anakin and R2 would be reunited on the next mission, resulting in the destruction of the Separatist listening post that would have plundered the Republic's data. Anakin was the hero yet again. And finally, the curtains of 22 BBY come to a close with two battles that are kept somewhat off the record. The liberation of Lanos was a Separatist victory that granted lots of propaganda for the Confederacy. But out deep in Sith space, Master Eth Koth would rehash a millennia-old war on the Sith homeworld of none other than Korriban. In that desolate, evil place, the light side of the Force was far from him, and his men suffered horrific casualties. But with that battle, the very first year of the Clone Wars comes to a close. 22 BBY, the first year of the Clone Wars, was categorized largely by movements and positioning. Hyperlane control was paramount, and troop placement was king. The Republic struggled to keep pace with the Confederacy, who already had legions upon legions of battle droids ready to deploy. Republic intelligence had to allocate resources with intention, and often relied on trickery and espionage to win. And sometimes, even that wasn't enough, and it required the risky thinking and pure dumb luck of Anakin Skywalker to clutch nearly every single victory that he was involved in. Although both sides developed weapons with the intention of bringing a swift end to the fight, it appeared that someone was aware that this war was not going to end anytime soon. All of this positioning and establishment was to prepare for yet another wave of death and hatred. In this year, many developments took place at a rapid speed. For all his bravery and for bringing a Padawan to knighthood, Obi-Wan Kenobi had to be awarded the rank of Master and even given a seat on the Jedi High Council. For his courage and intuition, Anakin Skywalker was an established and a successful military leader and now a fully fledging Jedi Knight. And a plucky new addition had been added to the dynamic duo to make them the dynamic trio, Ahsoka Tano, whose can-do attitude both clashed and complemented Anakin's own brashness to create a bold new terror for the Separatist army. But behind all of the heroism and the posturing, a deep-seated anxiety spread like a plague. The hearts of the Jedi, soldiers, and innocents alike were all being squeezed by the cold hands of fear. The Separatists were ruthless and willing to use any means necessary to win, even if that meant creating man-made horrors beyond comprehension. The Republic touted themselves as being morally superior, but were being rotted from the inside out with corruption in their own Senate and their military ranks. All the fighting and death was spreading the dark side like ashes in the wind, choking out the light and blinding the Jedi's vision to the true nature of the war. Events were starting to bring everyone to their breaking point, and if someone hadn't already crossed their personal boundaries, they were beginning to contemplate it. And yet, the only being who remained totally calm was the one pulling the strings behind it all, Chancellor Palpatine, Darth Sidious. Be sure to join us again soon when we continue the Clone Wars in its second year. But until then, I do sincerely hope that you enjoyed today's documentary and the entire first year of the Clone Wars. I hope you enjoyed the beginning before Ahsoka was introduced and the Clone Wars series officially kicks off in the animated series. Anakin is absolutely the greatest warrior in this war and in the Clone Wars, and now we really get to see it fleshed out. But my friends, year 2 is going to be much darker, so I appreciate your patience as we work on it. Your support for these long videos and lore documentaries means the absolute world. Thank you guys so much for visiting the channel, and as always, may the Force be with you.